from the military forces, and also university professors in the area of law to prepare in the professional legal area, because we have to become prepared, all of us, in order to be prepared, well, very well prepared in international military field and human rights. This is a fast presentation that we have today, very productive, and we are in Brazil at the course is at your disposal. It is open for all of the foreigners that want to participate in the course, and is the only one that has officers and lawyers from the Inter-American Defense Board, so everybody can participate. Thank you very much. We should now start with the first panel in charge of the moderator, Dr. William Kodnick. Dr. William Kodnick is business postgraduate in the studies in the United Kingdom. So it was nearly a decade as coordinator of the program of public security, the Regional Center for Peace and Disarmament and Development of Latin America and the Caribbean, with a seat in Peru. He obtained a master's in the State University in San Francisco, in the International Politics at the Institute of International Studies of Monterrey. Also, at this time, he will be accompanied by Dr. Elisa Zaceda, who carried out his doctorate in law with a postgraduate in, in the Unified Center of Teaching in Brasilia and a Master of Naval Sciences. He is a member of the Technical Committee of the Brazilian Academy of International Law and of the Brazilian Association of Defense Studies. Currently, he is advisor of the Minister and Director of National Information School and Training of Military Justice in La Unión. He will also be accompanied by Dr. Marco Lopez Conejo, doctor in law by the University of Chile. He's a lawyer and has a doctorate in law with more than 30 years of professional experience. He is a member of the Artificial Intelligence Center and Digital Policy from Washington, D.C. He's a professor of Introduction to Law on International Artificial Intelligence at the School Postgraduate School of the Faculty of Law of the University of Development in Chile, and Lieutenant Colonel Ronald Medina Diaz, Masters in Military Sciences in the Higher School of War of the Army in Peru. Currently, he's a Deputy Director and Head of the Academic Department at the Center of Humanitarian International Law and Human Rights of the Armed Forces. He's also the Deputy Director of the Communication Schools of the Army of Peru. He has carried out a course of electronic war at the Communications School from Peru and the course on human rights implication and the rule of law at the Inter-American Defense Board. We wish to invite Dr. Conley and Dr. Lopez, who are present in Washington. Before starting with this first panel, I wish to say, dear audience, we inform you that the data, information, opinion, and comments with all of the speakers reflect opinions are responsibility. They do not express explicitly the opinion of the Inter-American Defense Board. Dr. Poli, the floor is yours.
Good morning. In regular times, I am a dean of the Perrier Center of National Defense, but today I am here as an expert in humanitarian aid and human rights. And I thank General Haycom and General Salgado for allowing me to have this space. My main work today in this panel, with a forehand, I apologize if at any times I ask you to finish your presentation because we don't have enough time, but the idea is not to say everything, but just to share some main ideas in order to provoke a debate with the people who are here as well as with the people who are online. Only two comments before we open up for Dr. Perez. In the first place, it is not a secret that today we are in a crossroads in the world of security and defense, looking at the severity and profundity of the challenges presented by the threats and the stakeholders that are facing these big changes. So in the humanitarian law is challenged not just by the principles but the mechanisms. And in the second place, with all the technological changes, we have the responsibility of understanding if the technological changes are, if we can adapt them within the existing frameworks, or if it is necessary to generate new frameworks in order to face these new changes in technology. And you can help us to dive deeper into this. So for the first presentation, I'm going to invite on the screen Dr. Alexandro Perez to talk to us about artificial intelligence. And beforehand, I'll apologize because 1 minute before you finish the 20 minutes, I'm going to ask you to summarize your ideas so that we can move on to the next presenter. So we're going to have virtual questions for the public, and then we're going to move on to the next session of question here with the class of 65. Dr. Perez, please, the virtual space is yours.
Olá, muito obrigado, bom dia.
Thank you very much. Good morning. First, I want to greet Minister Contel, General Salgado, and Richard. I want to say hello to all of the authorities present and the audience who is present online. And I want to congratulate the IADB for selecting this topic and for dealing with such a very important matter. For security and international defense, I'm going to divide my topic. I'm going to project my presentation with you so we can begin today.
Bom, eu espero que esteja passando tudo aí tranquilo, né?
I hope that you can see it.
Estamos vendo a tela?
Can you see the presentation? I'm sharing it. Can you see it, the presentation?
Posso conseguir? Estamos conseguindo ver a tela?
Can I continue? Can you see the presentation? Can you see my screen? Can you begin again, Dr. Perez? We're hearing you on YouTube, but not here in the room.
Bom, nós vamos seguir então essa
Okay, so then
essa agenda.
We're going to continue with this agenda. We're going to be here talking about the military applications of artificial intelligence, about the aspects of international law. Can you hear?
Pois não.
¿Este es Zoom o es otra plataforma? Este es Zoom. Ok.
Tá aí.
Al doctor lo escuchamos. Pero
Tô. Estou escutando normal.
Doctor, are you listening or not?
Tá ok, então, aguardo. Muito obrigado. Vou tirar a tela, então. Obrigado.
Sí,
Thank you.
no está. Aquí me aparece
Tá,
dos,
obrigado.
que es este, que no me deja estar seleccionando. Esto no funciona. Esta es la que debe estar funcionando, pero
Let me know if we can move on to the next presenter. We apologize for these inconveniences. We're going to fix the technological issues, and let's just take advantage of the next panelist, Dr. Marcos Lopez Oneto from the University of Development of Chile and from the Center of Artificial Intelligence in Washington. And he kindly will speak to us on the armed drones and massive surveillance.
puedo pasar la pantalla ya. Extender la pantalla para que no esté saliendo. Estamos así.
No, la ponencia que voy a hacer es sobre
So the presentation that I'm going to do is about autonomous weapons and the relation between right as a mechanism for solving conflicts
Puedo iniciar.
Muchas gracias. Buenos días, good morning, buen día. Gracias por la
Good
invitación.
morning. Thank you for the invitation.
Presente a los que nos acompañan virtualmente también.
Thank you to everybody who's joining virtually as well.
La ponencia que voy a presentar se
The
denomina
presentation of today is called Autonomous Weapons, Artificial Intelligence, and Digital Dehumanization, a case of necessary connection and essential connection between artificial intelligence law and Martin's Clause.
Estamos en tránsito
We're in a transition to an era of uncertainty,
y estamos viviendo ya
and we are living now, maybe perhaps a moment, a pivotal moment of artificial intelligence, a moment where
es una metáfora poderosa
the artificial intelligence is a powerful metaphor to describe an instant where civilization is facing the point where human creation creates such a magnitude that it makes one stop oneself and look back and to wonder if knowledge has crossed the threshold.
Es el momento en que los científicos
And
como
it is the moment where scientists such as Oppenheimer to the nuclear forum are doubting because of their complete success of their technology, such a potent technology that might be let out of control. So this image sounds strongly in this area of artificial intelligence where there's a convergence of algorithms, data, and computer power, which is agitating a force which we cannot predict. The consequences we cannot predict. It's a technology that can transform the world, and it is transforming it right now, but it may also destabilize it, and it is already destabilizing it. The evolution of human and machine, it's not just a future hypothesis, it is a process that is redefining the borders between biological, technology, and cultural. the technology is not isolated, it is integrating and it is expanding together with other scientific fields, generating a co-evolution process between humans and technology. The scientists and philosophers have started theorizing that artificial intelligence acts like an accelerator of the human evolution in the same way that language evolves. And in this framework, the sciences of biotechnology, nanotechnology, and neurosciences are coming together with artificial intelligence and giving birth to systems that can reprogram live matter, also the human body, and modify cognition. The boundary between organisms and artifact is becoming blurry. The algorithms are learning from the body, and the bodies are starting to integrate and becoming hybrid with the algorithms. This convergence has not only technical implications, but ontological and ethical implications. What does it mean to be a human when intelligence and creativity can be shared or increased by a machine? And in the same way, the cultural and social sciences, the gender idea, transhumanism, are reflecting on how these transformations are reconfiguring the identities, roles, and notions. The artificial intelligence, and it's important to have this present in mind, it's not just altering biology, but it is also redefining culture, work, desire, perception. We are on the brink of an ontological change because it changes our conception of perception of beauty. We are in the brink of a new evolutional phase where the human being is not just the only being that acts, and also the convergence with other sciences. It is a revolutionary point. There's also risks that could irreversibly affect the history of humanity. So I'm going back to the beginning. Are we living our Oppenheimer moment with artificial intelligence, this instant where the human creation is a mirror, but it is also a threat to progress? Or are we in transit we're in transit to that Oppenheimer moment, where there's this border where the intelligence that has been created defies the creator? And if this transit is ongoing, if we have already activated this sequence, is there still the possibility of stopping the process, of containing what we have liberated, of imposing limits to an intelligence that is learning faster than than us in ethical and moral values? When the first nuclear rehearsal occurred and Oppenheimer saw that there was a point of no return, we need to learn to live with the fire that we have already lit up. What are the empirical data that allow us to move forward to an Oppenheimer moment? As you know, the history of humanity, the observable universe, has millions of years, and just now, this recent technological change in which that artificial intelligence is a part of starts in 1950. And in just 70 years, this machine, which is, this is not an innovation, but it is a million times more potent. So therefore, if we project the development of humanity and we think strategically 50 or 100 years later, the hypothesis that the AI, together with other technologies, such as biotechnology, nanotechnology, they're going to produce a change in the human beings that is extremely plausible.
Y la ciencia ficción
And science fiction
es la ciencia del presente.
is almost like science of the present. The first ethical questions of the topic were provided by Isaac Asimov with the famous laws of robotic in the year 40 of the last century, when he was saying that the main pillar of the robotic laws, which we can understand it as laws of artificial intelligence, because they are cited as instruments in the European law. So Asimov was saying that the first law is that the artificial intelligence cannot get to a point where the human being loses control over it, or that this harms the human beings. And so as things are going now, we have three types of artificial intelligence. Weak intelligence, which is now the current state of artificial intelligence. The general artificial intelligence, which is when the systems can have interdependence, they have common sense, and they have the capability of it. With conservatives, in the year 2100, humanity may be getting to general artificial intelligence, because for now, once we get to the general artificial intelligence, the leap to super artificial intelligence, this means when the machine awakens, when the machine says, I am, when we get to that point, the topic is critical. What is the current impact of artificial intelligence, which is right now in a weak phase? Algorithmic discrimination, surveillance and loss of privacy, lack of transparency, manipulation and autonomy, work displacement, and this dissemination of dispersion of responsibility. It is affecting the right to physical and psychic integrity, freedom of thought and expression, equality. Also, the property rights, privacy and protection of personal data, personal autonomy, and free development of personality, which is present in European law, information and explainability, and repairing and effective responsibility. And the neuronal and this effective responsibility, then one of the main meetings to regulate the artificial intelligence occurred in 2017 in the Asilomar Principles. Here it was crystallized. This was an initiative, a technological initiative that is occurring in the technological world. People like Martin Chris these were the people who started, and they warned about the dangers of artificial intelligence. And they did the main catalog of ethical principles that should guide the governance of artificial intelligence. These are 23. I'm not going to mention them, but what's most important, basically, they're inspired because that they should be, the artificial intelligence should be focused on doing good. It's basically what their focus is. And Asilomar, so far, they have edited more than 300 guidelines and catalogs. I recommend to visit the observatory of the OECD because there we have the catalog, all of the catalogs, the guidelines that are established in the world. And then from there, it is very important, the ethical recommendation of UNESCO on artificial intelligence, also the principles of OECD, and also the companies nowadays, the technological companies, they're doing their own catalogs of ethical principles of governance, and Amazon, I think, doesn't have it. And then we get to a point of synthesis of this all, which these are the ontological pillars, and one can deduce and infer from these all of the norms in a matter of, as for the artificial intelligence. So then there's these are autonomy, justice, explicability, beneficence, non-maleficence, and these are principles that are shared with artificial intelligence. The principle of explicability, we have these from Professor Floridi, which is an eminence in this topic. I'm going to explain just some because I don't want to go over time. So the principle of autonomy basically looks for the fact that human being cannot create systems that have a level of autonomy that can cause moral damage. So they have a responsibility on what the artificial intelligence systems do. The systems should be explicable. They can be traced. They should be traced. So we have to know how it gets to a certain result. And practically, this is impossible today. That's why there's a field of explicability of artificial intelligence. So these are artificial intelligence systems that can explain how artificial intelligence are getting to their conclusions or results. This synthesis, ontological synthesis of the principle, is also the European Union experts are also dealing with this. And they are using these with other terms in the framework of European law. But basically we get to this only law that exists, which is the law of artificial intelligence of the European Union, and it establishes a regulation based on risk. It establishes artificial intelligence systems that are, it says which ones are unacceptable. This cannot circulate through the European Union. For example, these are systems that may cause damage to vulnerable age groups, such as kids, older people, sick people. And also there's systems of high risk, systems that are focused on education and jobs. Those systems may definitely circulate, but they have to comply with a certain amount of requirements. So since the system is designed up to its release, they have to comply with this. And also there's systems with limited risk. These are systems that don't need to go through this process of requirements from the European Union. But however, they have requirements for transparency and then minimum risk systems. So the question is, what happens with artificial intelligence in the digital environment? Is it regulated? Obviously not, because this is a topic that nowadays doesn't have a solution at a global level. So this is the framework where we have to analyze the systems, the autonomous weapon systems of artificial intelligence, and this is in a field where there's no regulation. What are the systems of autonomous weapons? These are systems that can select objectives and they can attack objectives. and with or without human control. So they are self-governed. They can be lethal or non-lethal. They can be of massive destruction or of limited destruction. And all of the defense departments are talking about this topic and regulating on this topic. And so thank you to the United States. They have started talking about this topic. And of course, you must know the directive that establishes the sort of a framework for autonomous weapons. It establishes the levels of autonomy. There's a semi-autonomous weapons. This is activated by an operator. The operator establishes the target. The weapon starts working. Then there's the one that is supervised by a human being. It gives the possibility that once the target is selected, they can intervene, and also the autonomous ones, they can attack without intervention. There's other two categories. Oof. And when there's a general artificial intelligence, these systems will be able to exist. These are systems activated by other artificial intelligences. They won't require human activation. They can be activated by other artificial intelligences and systems that can be self-activated also, which it means that they can be self-activated. And the blockchain technology is definitely going to occupy a very important role there. So what is being said with regards to autonomous weapons in universities, in the forums, first is that it generates a digital dehumanization, because if we are numbers and we can be discriminated through an artificial intelligence system, and can you imagine that the level of discrimination when this can produce the death of a person? The loss of control, human control, the algorithm partiality, the lack of judgment and comprehension, lack of responsibility, and the reduction of the war threshold also. If in the future in the medium or long term, there's a battlefield where the presence of robotic systems is ever more bigger, maybe the public opinion will be accepting this factor of war. This is also a very complex topic. Since there are no regulations on autonomous weapons, thank you, you have 2 more minutes. So what can these states do? How can they respond to these challenges that autonomous weapons provide in a context where there's public specific regulation? So then there's two sides, the artificial intelligence law. There's also, which basically is a law that is being built based on human rights, and its objective is to drive development of artificial intelligence with an objective of sustainability of humanity. And the Martens Clause, which you have studied maybe more than once, is a clause that has been incorporated to humanitarian international law, which says that if there's no specific regulation, then the states have to use humanitarian law. And the Martens Clause has been incorporated in international treaties, in a convention on biological weapons, on gases of conventional weapons, of anti-personnel mines. So it is present in many international instruments that regulate the use of weapons. If you can give a conclusion, because we will have more time in the question and answer section. Yes, thank you. So concluding, since there's an absence of regulation, which is the current state on this topic, the states can be guided by the the artificial intelligence law and the Martin's Clause. And Martin's Clause is based on the principles of humanity, which say that we have to use that which causes the less damage as possible. If I am a designer of an autonomous weapon, I have to take into account the humanity principles in the design of the system, thereby programming so that these principles can be integrated. That's the idea. And then the artificial intelligence law is similar. During the whole cycle of life, it has to be subjected to the norms of artificial intelligence, which guide these systems. Thank you very much, Doctor. We are sorry because we have a limit of time. But and the answer and sections questions, but we have to go to break, a 5-minute break, in order to fix the agenda. So in 5 minutes, we will be back.
So we should take advantage of time, and I think we have a good transition from the first presentation with the second, because Dr. Perez, the National Military Justice School of Brazil, is going to talk about artificial intelligence, and from the point of view of who is responsible. In order not to take any more time from Dr. Perez, and this is your space, and excuse us because of the technological and technical issues that we had, that we have him on our screen. Please go
Muito
ahead.
obrigado mais uma vez.
Thank you very
Saudar
much.
então novamente todas as autoridades que já foram nominadas, aos membros dessa
Once
seleta
again,
mesa e à audiência em geral. Vamos então tentar aqui
and thank you for the
dividir
audience.
a tela com vocês para que a gente possa prosseguir na nossa
So
apresentação.
we'll see the screen so that we can all follow the presentation. We shall be talking about the artificial intelligence and the reports of the group, these types of
E o entendimento do Comitê Internacional da Cruz Vermelha, que foi
So,
editado
I'm
agora
sorry, I'm
nesse
here
mês
very
de
cut.
outubro. Então temos aqui
Is
algumas novidades. Vamos tentar seguir esse
I don't
sumário
know
para
if
ser
we have
apresentado.
any
Falarei
issue. We're going to
rapidamente sobre a aplicação
try
militar da inteligência artificial,
with regards to the
os
summary,
aspectos do direito internacional dos conflitos
initial
armados e terceiro,
considerations
uma
and melody
finais.
application.
Sem maiores delongas,
So we should be starting
o
now.
apresentador anterior, ele facilitou o meu
The
caminho, né? Então
presenter
vamos aproveitar
facilitated
tudo que ele já falou.
the road, so
Basicamente, a inteligência artificial, a base teórica,
the initial text, the theoretical base to be
consegue pensar
considered.
humanamente, agir humanamente,
One can
pensar
think once
racionalmente ou agir
again
racionalmente.
o-
Mas, na verdade, o que importa
on
no
how
direito são
to
algumas
open
peculiaridades específicas da inteligência artificial, principalmente para o uso da inteligência artificial nos conflitos armados. E quais são essas questões? Primeiro, a questão da
which is very
automação,
successful.
a questão da imprevisibilidade e a questão do controle da pesquisa e do desenvolvimento.
There is a control,
Esses três aspectos são preocupação para exatamente os
and
órgãos que
this is
tentam
a
construir uma
concern,
convenção internacional para regular o uso militar da inteligência
and to
artificial.
regulate the military use of this with regards to
A principal questão que
the
vai afetar
production.
principalmente o
And the main
entendimento do Comitê
issue
Internacional da Cruz Vermelha é a
of the
opacidade
International Committee,
são
this is the final
fazer uso
issues,
dos
which is to
materiais
conclude
que serão utilizados em armas autônomas. A opacidade é uma questão estratégica E
And so,
mais à frente eu vou mostrar como a opacidade vai influenciar
so
na questão da regulação.
the-
Mas antes eu preciso falar do
with the
viés. O viés
algorithm errors,
algorítmico é uma das
systematic
grandes
errors and
preocupações
relativities in
do
the
uso da
system,
IA nos conflitos armados. O viés diz respeito exatamente
is he
a alguns
immediately
erros
is
sistemáticos que podem
speaking
acontecer, né?
systematically
Algumas respostas
prejudice
que
or
podem
the
ser dadas
systems or
pelo sistema
algorithms of the
que não
IA
estão em
continue
consonância
to
com aquilo
taking
que é
part
esperado.
of
E isso em
the
decorrência do
process,
comportamento
making
discriminatório que
decisions
pode
in
ser
environment.
colocado em três fases da utilização desse sistema. Na verdade, na fase da modelagem
In
do
the use
processamento, nós podemos ter
of
vieses. Na
different
fase do
tools
treinamento, nós podemos ter
and
vieses
the
com dados
processing
encruzados. E na fase
and
do uso
training,
também e da utilização,
which
nós podemos
occurs as
ver
a result of one
utilização
of the
com
given
vieses que podem vir então a
in
causar
the
problemas para o uso
trendy
tradicional humanitário.
entrance,
A
the
inteligência
military
artificial nas
applications
atividades
of
militares, ela tem uma
artificial
gama muito grande
intelligence.
de aplicação. Eu coloco alguns exemplos na tela, só excetuando a
As
questão do
some
chão de drones.
examples
Os demais exemplos são aplicações que são praticamente
are
liberadas pelo direito
some
internacional, porque não envolvem risco aos seres humanos, não envolvem risco
which
público.
involves risks
Vamos ver
in
se esse
the
pequeno
human
filme de
being and
3 minutos
also
vai
the
rodar, para
public.
que a gente possa falar um pouco da
Mm,
inteligência artificial.
Maybe this video, a 3-minute video, is going to help, and I can put it on. Let me start
Bom,
the video.
não rodou, vamos seguir adiante então. Esse vídeo que eu coloquei é exatamente da ONG Stopping Killing Robots, que é uma ONG que está tentando, então, fazer com que a
So this
regulação da
is
inteligência artificial para o uso militar seja
for
feita
the
de uma
use
forma
of military
coerente,
use
consistente e responsável. Mas, na verdade,
existing.
as armas
In
autônomas,
reality,
como já foi mostrado pelo
the
meu
autonomous
antecessor, são
weapons
exatamente
are
dispositivos que podem, então,
are
atacar um ou
about
mais
that are
alvos sem a
selected,
intervenção
these
humana.
arms, the
E a
weapon
questão da
system that are
intervenção humana
selected, attack
ela é
or
bem apresentada
are
no relatório
greater.
do Comitê Internacional da Cruz Vermelha e diz exatamente que a não intervenção humana
And so
aquela questão que após a ativação inicial, o ser humano, a
the
aplicação de
human
força é
being, the
acionada em
application of the
resposta
forces
sem que o ser
is
humano possa
what a human
intervir,
being can do.
teoricamente.
You can intervene
E dentro do
theoretically.
contexto do uso militar da
Within the
inteligência artificial,
context of
nós
military
precisamos
use of
apresentar aqui essa questão
artificial
das
intelligence,
três vertentes.
we need to
O homem
present
dentro do looping,
the
o homem
issue,
em cima do
the
looping e o homem
man
fora do looping.
within the
E o
oh,
que é o
the
looping?
loop
O looping é
and at the
exatamente
top
aquilo que nos
and out of the
interessa para a
loop.
atividade
What
militar.
is
O
loop is
looping é o
precisely that what
looping
is
da
interesting
decisão,
for
é o
military
order.
activity.
É a
It is a
questão de
decision
como os militares
and
resolvem os
the
seus problemas
order.
militares.
How the
Observa,
military
orienta,
reserve their
decide e age.
military
Quando o
issues, they
ser humano não
observe,
está
orient,
dentro do
decide,
looping de
and act.
ação de uma
When the
inteligência
human being
artificial,
is not
ela
within
vai
the action
praticamente, o sistema de armas vai
looping
fazer
of
todas
artificial
essas fases do
intelligence,
processo de
it will
forma
do all those
autônoma.
phases
É
of the process in
exatamente
an
isso que nos
autonomous
traz
manner.
preocupação.
And this
Eu
is
coloco aqui na tela
exactly
alguns
what
exemplos
brings
de
the serious
armamentos que
concerns.
já
I
utilizam,
bring some
né, a inteligência
examples
artificial
of
autônoma
weapons
e
that
já estão
are already
praticamente
using
sendo certificados pelos
autonomous
seus países.
artificial
Mas
intelligence,
não
and they are already being
apresentam
certified
o
in their
problema da
countries, but
forma
they
que ele pode
do
ser
not
apresentado.
present the problem
E eu
in the
coloco
way
aqui o
that it can be
paradoxo do
presented.
emprego
And I
dos sistemas
place
autônomos em
here the
combate. Isso é uma
paradox
coisa que
of
foi construída
the
pela
use or the
pela minha
employment
pesquisa.
of those technologies.
Hoje, a sociedade
I
internacional,
did it, I
principalmente os
built it.
estados que
So now,
pretendem utilizar
international society,
armas
particularly the states that want
autônomas
to
em
use
conflitos armados, eles
autonomous
se deparam com
weapons
esse
in armed
paradoxo, com esse
conflicts,
conflito. Eles
they
precisam trazer
have
um
this
armamento que
conflict.
consiga
They
vencer
need to
o ciclo da
bring a
decisão
weapon
de forma
that
rápida e
is
mais rápida do que a do
intense,
inimigo.
is
Ao mesmo
rapid
tempo,
in
esse
the
sistema
cycle
de
and
armas ele
is
precisa ter
faster than the enemy, and that
previsibilidade
arm or weapon
a sua
system needs
resposta
to have
precisa estar confiável
it
para
needs
que
to
ele
be
possa ser
previsible,
certificado por
needs
esses
to
estados.
have
E
response, a
análise jurídica vai
trustworthy
praticamente ser
response. This is
baseada
why it has been decided in
no tipo de
legal
tarefa que a
analysis
arma
will be the
vai
based on the
receber
type
para
of
cumprir.
task
Né? E
that
dentro
the weapon is
dessa
going to
questão,
receive
o
to
grau
comply.
de controle
Within that
humano que
issue,
essa
the
arma vai ter
degree of human
e o
control that this
controle
weapon will
humano
have.
sempre
And the
é um
human
aspecto
control, ladies
principal
and gentlemen, is a
que
main aspect
interfere na referência ao
that
direito internacional
intervenes and adherence to international humanitarian law. Red Cross believes and accepts the regulations of weapons that the human being, where the human being can have complete control. The person can use your judgment in all of the phases from the moment of production up until its use in the combat field. And this will be where the autonomous system can should be monitored for it not to commit errors against human rights. And in this sense, there are three problems for the use of artificial intelligence in armed conflicts. And which are all those problems? First of all, ethical issues, which my predecessor spoke about so well. And the second is the adherence to the principles of international humanitarian law. And third, the issue of certification and control. With regards to ethical issues, the big point there, which was already presented, is how to place a weapon systems and algorithm, something that is made to control a destruction machine to decide over the life and death of a human being. We shall remember that all of the national executions of the planet have their processes to judge crimes, legal issues, and to give a sentence to a citizen that could have committed a crime. So how are we going to make this power for a machine? Another problem, the machine does not have a legal personality. Of any way, this autonomous system of in the legal or justice system will respond to any international jurisdiction. So this concerns the Red Cross is a part of the distinction. How are we going to have the security that an autonomous system used in combat will be able to distinguish between a civilian that did not participate in the activities and a combatant, or how the system will be able to differentiate from a combatant that is outside of the combat that uses these weapons. This, of course, is a concern for humanitarian law, how this autonomous systems of weapons will be able to understand what is the level and what is the degree of power of combat that it needs to place on the military objective to reach the desired objective. This is a very difficult issue to understand. How will it understand what is military advantage and what is exactly the power of combat necessary to reach that military advantage? And lastly, is a precaution. How will we place man to have the possibility of stopping the attack of an autonomous weapon? When we do this, we are reducing the capacity of autonomy of the weapon and response to the military problem. And lastly, the certification and control. Article 36 of the paragraph I of the additional protocol 1, excuse me, Article 36 of protocol 1 says that the states have the right to see if their weapons and technological means that are implemented as combat weapons have adherence to international humanitarian law. There is not one single organization that has been authorized to do this. This is there so the state can decide, and the state has to build a technological weapon or where an autonomous weapon has to have a weapon that respects the prohibitions that already exist, such as if it doesn't have the capacity to see nuclear data or biological or chemical data, if it doesn't have the capacity to see or to discriminate many weapons are forbidden to be used in armed conflict. And along this road that we're looking for on the side of international humanitarian law and Red Cross is to place the human being as a maximum capacity to anticipate its effect. And this is an issue that is going to fall on top of the commander that will decide to activate an autonomous system, autonomous weapons system. And for this, it is necessary that the commander has complete visibility and trust that the system will be capable of doing it, to be previsible, to know exactly which is the functioning as operating issues and the outcome that comes out of the use of artificial intelligence to have the security that the system will function exactly in the way for which it had been built in order for it to function. So, in this sense, is where we have the meaning of human control for international humanitarian law of an autonomous weapons needs to be very significant, needs to be explained, and needs to have its own judgment made by a human being. The machine cannot be capable of judging or deciding by itself. So, in this sense, as part of human control, we must have the previsibility, the trust, and the human intervention in the cycle of action of the machine, perfect knowledge and information of how this machine is going to operate and function, and the uh, conscious consciousness that the responsibility will never fall on the machine but will fall on the human being. The degree of control can be established in several ways. As I said, the development of tasks, the decision of the commander or the operator to activate, and the operation of the system. So along these lines, control and development, we need to keep in mind if we really decide to build and use in artificial intelligence systems, and we have to limit its use for a specific thing. We need to have the capacity to restrict its movement, time, and space, and we must allow human supervision, activation, knowledge, and understanding of the functioning of the environment must be fundamental. The consciousness of the situation of the operational environment or the weapon is going to be used to prevent any risk that could occur for civilians and civilian objects. And the control of the operation, the control must always be in the hands of man. The level of human supervision of intervention is fundamental in this sense. So the technical development and the manipulation of parameters and human supervision are extremely important in order to be able to certify the autonomous weapon system. And what concerns the International Red Cross Committee in search of that response? The UN has been studying this for some time and some decisions have been reached. The national states that are participating of the run of artificial intelligence weapons have the reasons to be able to develop this, and the UN and Red Cross cannot regulate our future, the future of the armed conflict. We shall be within a tremendous gray zone because UN considers that there will be great difficulty of differentiation, the amount of data that we can place, if we can place all the combat parameters within these autonomous weapons. At this point in time of our history, without the computer, it's very big. Another thing that we say is that undiscriminated attacks and without precaution, once within the combat, and the military seek to go against the cycle and to be faster than the enemy, to defeat and go faster than the enemy, where they will place parameters to intervene in that decision without making that the weapon system loses its effectiveness and speed, operating speed. And lastly, the proportionality. So we don't know if this it generates a big concern in the International Red Cross Committee. A suggestion is to make or build an international convention to prohibit weapons that do not have adherence to these aspects, particularly the aspects of proportionality. What are the strengths for the future with regards to the autonomous weapon? Integration to the processes. These are not predictable. They do not have a purpose if they don't use a machine because they have to self-adjust themselves. At that time, the Red Cross suggests that the system of learning for machine have been prohibited in these swarms and the free autonomy that has to give for the decision of these type of weapon and expand the capacity of the more possibilities that happen. What are the challenges? Challenge one is responsibility for war crimes. How is this going to be done? We're going to talk about that later. Ethical issues that were already talked about with great property by my predecessor, the Martin's Clause, how to do or what to do until one has a convention establishing the parameters that these weapons, if exist, can obey the human criteria and dictates of publicization. And so to put mass weapons in operation to see the different paradigms and use of force that could appear in the combat field and how to control research and development and avoid the proliferation, this uncontrolled proliferation of that system, the use of force, how a weapon, autonomous weapon, can understand what behaviors in the application of law and order or the enforcement of law and order, the hostility behaviors is violence that could be used at the maximum level from the first contact with a lethal force and the enforcement of law and order. And the lethal force is the last step. So in this, along this road, the responsibility will will lie in three different pillars: the state that can be made responsible for illegal issues international. The individual will be responsible before the international courts. If it's not the responsibility of the institution, they will also have the civil responsibility of all harm that could occur or damage that can occur to uh, civilians and objects. So we have the solidary responsibility, and this will be done at all levels. Never before in armed conflict a weapon had this type of responsibility. The builders of the algorithm are responsible. The technicians who are going to load the data also have a responsibility. The persons who will be training and the commanders, the field commanders, will also be responsible. So, in this sense, one sees the core issues. Is everybody okay? Everybody listening? We have to close this part so that we can leave this for questions and answers. Go to the next presentation, and we shall leave the considerations for questions and answers. So I shall stop here. Excuse me, I couldn't conclude. So I ask for excuses because of time constraints. And our second presentation talked about the strategic aspects of military decisions with regards to artificial intelligence. Or a third presentation, we shall see if the operational aspects with the digital war with Lieutenant Colonel of Peruvian Army, Mr. Colonel Diaz, Colonel Medina Diaz, please, your presentation.
Buenos días, ¿estamos en línea?
Good morning. Are we
Agradezco el
online?
espacio.
Thank you very much for your invitation. On behalf of the Republic of Peru, thank everybody who gives us the permission to be in these spaces. We thank from the Ministry of Defense and of the Center of International Humanitarian Law. And so my topic is short, but we shall try to resolve, uh, but we shall ensure that it's of the authority and responsibility of the cyber operations. The digital war, what is the digital war, also known as cyber war? These are conflicts that are developed in the cyberspace, and these conflicts that are developed here have adherence on a state, two states, or adherence many states where there is not a situation that allows us to have definite, defined responsibility on the management of this large situation. Cyberspace definitely does not have an information environment that is of exclusive domain, the global domain. In the independent structure of IT systems and the devices and measures. Of course, these are embedded devices designed to carry out specific functions within the coordinated devices to optimize and make optimization of the decision. It's true that it involves internet, but in any case, it involves the devices
Dichos sistemas.
of the
El
systems.
ciberespacio nos muestra y
The
nos indica
cyberspace shows
se determinan ciberoperaciones
where it's determined
donde
by
orden
cyber
militar y no
operations,
militar
where
se realizan
military and
acciones ofensivas,
non-military
acciones defensivas
issues
en
see
línea de tiempo
offensive,
dentro de
defensive,
una
and
clasificación
intelligence
efectiva de las
operations
mismas.
within an
En estas
effective
consideraciones, las
applications
acciones
of these and these
ofensivas
types of
buscan el
situations.
perfil
The
degradar a los
offensive
sistemas
operations
informáticos
see
del
to
enemigo.
degrade or
Dentro de las denominaciones,
enemy
este se ve
operations
expresado
within
aunque
the
adversarios
of
enemigos
offensive
tiene
of
un funcionamiento inicial
operations of
donde
enemies
la
or a
infección
usual
tiene un carácter
operation
inicial
where
y
it
este
has an
carácter permite
initial
múltiples
nature where it
dispositivos
has
como
multiple
itinerantes que son
devices such as
computadoras,
itinerant
routers,
with our
cámaras,
computers,
todos los demás
cameras,
dispositivos
all of the
tecnológicos
devices
conectados de
that are
manera
connected
virtual o de manera
virtually
real.
or wireless.
Esto tiene una confluencia
This
que
has a
alcanza la coordinación del
congruence
ataque, donde
regarding
todos los
the
boots
coordination
enviados,
of attacks where all of the data
solicitudes
sent
tienen una
or
directriz que
requests
tiene una
are
alta
fully
saturación
defined
del
and
sistema,
has
donde esta
where the
saturación
system is saturated
se va
with
directamente sobre
saturation
los servidores
goes
de red.
directly over the network
Definitivamente ha
servers.
habido
Definitely,
ataques que se han suscitado
there
en
has been
diferentes tiempos,
attacks that have
sobre todo
occurred in
uno de los
different
más
times.
incidentes ha sido
Particularly,
en
one of the
2016, un
incidents
ataque
was in
hacia lo que
2016,
fueron
an
productos
attack
de
to
trigo, donde
Deviant
incidieron
products where
definitivamente para ver la
definitely,
debilidad del
it
servicio
incited
y la
with
vulnerabilidad
regards to the
puede parecer
service and
a la infraestructura
vulnerabilities
que
that it
puede
had as
manejar.
regards the
Estos
infrastructure that it could
virus
manage.
que supuestamente
So
van
supposedly,
enmarcados en diferentes
these are
organizaciones,
framed
definitivamente
within
deben de
different
analizar y
organizations,
la
and they
dimensión que
definitely
estamos
see the
expuestos a
viability and
diferentes
the idea
ataques.
that we are
El día
how we're
2021
exposed to different
como
attacks.
años anteriores, fue
Definitely
un
was
ataque
not like
cercano
a
con
previous
diferentes
year, like
situaciones,
an
ahora
attack other
finalizar,
places.
causando
Now their
daños que
end
realmente sí se
purpose
ven
is to cause
reflejados en los
damage
diferentes campos de la actividad humana.
that
Los
is in all
sistemas
fields of
que se
human
han
attacks
generado
and
en
all of
cuanto
the
a
systems that can be
operaciones
generated with regards to
existen
cyber
diferentes. Por
operations. We
eso
have
es la higiene
different
cibernética que
types
nosotros
of
podemos
these cyber
aplicar en el día a día.
cyber
Vean,
issues. So
sistemas
it could
recurrentes que
help us in our
podemos emplear
daily work,
en estas
recurring
operaciones
systems that can
estratégicas
work
casos
in
como
these
desastre, casos de
defensive
desastre de
situations
tsunami,
like
de SolarWinds,
Stuxnet or solar winds have had a recurrence. to see that all of these systems require of an active participation as regards the the to do the political, economic, industry, military, and personal, even the society as regards their participation. Another of the aspects that generates a concern situation is to see that cyber operations also recur to intelligence, where intelligence and the collection of information through digital means without authorization, having this competence of what we're carrying out could be included in different networks, the capture of sensitive data. Yesterday, I can say that here in Peru, we had a recurrence as regards a situation directly over national identity documents, which recurs all of the situations as regards of the data administration. There are important aspects as regards the enforcement of these systems. One saves the different application. Basically, that there were cyber applications, national defense or war are exposed. And they're also recurring as regards knowing the information and knowledge of these information, which creates uncertainty with all of the different bodies. And another important aspect is the government part where the protection of critical issues is critical and sensitive data of state, of recurrence and adherence of all where we all belong. Of course, private or public activities do not escape this as regards uh, uh, private administration, the corporate networks and resilience. All of this has a criminal, like where organized crime looks to extort and sub and sabotage. Different technical tools are being used with an influencing issue as particularly as the identity where phishing enters into the emails where we do not have an apparent issue where seeing different phases or presentations that are necessary so that the people can access different usual uses of the same. That's where they're introduced. It's also recurring to see how social engineer and a series of technicals used to manipulate and uh, trick people in having information. Also, it has with the issue of day-to-day work where the information is seen from its very beginning. We see different threads as we have seen in the deployment of this, and this makes us understand how, within the operations on a day to day basis, are entering and seeing how cyber operations within the framework of international humanitarian law is going to introduce which is the applicable framework with regards to this. And we keep in mind of that international humanitarian law is applied in national and international conflicts, and it has persons that are not involved. And then at the in Geneva we have four conventions, and within human rights should applies in all of its magnitude and to see the conflict, and this is applied to state actions. Some rights could be limited in circumstances, particularly those that could be restricted. Definitely talk within this applicable framework. The steps that we're carrying out are still not necessary to establish regulation that allows protection as regards to aspects both in human rights and international humanitarian law, which sees an opening for the illegal issues in all of its magnitude. The principles applicable as regards the prohibitions, distinction, proportionality, precaution, responsibility, and protection always has a recurrence because they deal with what's inherent to people, what's inherent to conventionality or the functionality as regards to the development of these, as regards distinction. Definitely, if we are in war and applying IHL, we see that the answer is towards military objectives designed and defined. However, when these military objectives do not have distinction, we shall have an inherence that will harm the citizen that is outside of the operation is also necessary to have proportionality effect, be it the military objective and not to cause harm to civilians with regards to the anticipated issues will we see recurrence. Uh, and since we're seeing in the world occurrences within the conventions, there are gray zones, gray areas where unrestricted respect to public property and private property and to conserve the culture in the world sometimes makes us infringe on different access that occur. Some precautions in the conduction of these issues is to verify the nature and objective, and particularly to minimize the incidental damage. The collateral harm should be uh, better. We can work on that within the possibilities, also possibilities of indispensable services for survival. We see that the public services are essential and necessary so that the citizens can continue to work. The reinciting cases in conductivity are not without protection with all that viability. We have obligations with regards to human rights in cyber operations, and this allows us to see that not only the management of the networks, both military or civilian, are not exempt. We have hospitals that currently function on network. We have schools that are working through this large magnitude that is allowed by the wireless and non-wireless networks. And this is definitely backed by all of the obligation that has so much for human rights and for international humanitarian law. And privacy is very important. There's a situation definitely is going to stop to belong to us if we don't enter into the possibility of being able to uh, hang on to that situation. The freedom of information and expression, we always associate it, and this is an inherence of the human being. However, for cases like these situations, the restrictions that need to be implemented need to be more strict, that the states and the political commitment needs to have a necessary recurrence with the purpose that the protection is greater and that the spaces are not so indelible, that they need to be rigid, where you see an ordinance, the expression of information for the citizens and persons who are not involved in a conflict. There are situations that correspond to a due process or affect the resources within the legal standards, and these are legal issues of a response that is still being under implementation, where the legal part with an arm of is going to be working on this trend. There is obligations to carry out due diligence, extraction, and particularly the responsibility that needs to be assumed in every situation, which allows that this process is being carried out in a clear and effective way. There's practical, legal, and specific problems, particularly in cyberspace zone that definitely is open for all the crime situations and has great prevalence in the situation. It's usually difficult. Let's keep in mind that the actions of these persons or groups or states that dedicate to these activities definitely do not have recurrence because the location is not referenced. The attacks can come from anywhere, and the domain allows you to move within any field of dimensions, including even with war. Regarding the opacity, these are critical infrastructures where definitely they need to be practical or private. Public and private issues are complicated. So there is an unintentional propagation where it's propagated through words to have obligations or to cause issues. And there are issues that affect harm in the future and previsibility and proportionality, the ordinance and regulations and guidelines that are seen in future need to be isolated in the future. and the interference with humanitarian services, the practical and legal services, and need to create limitation with this temporary limitation translated into spaces summarized and standards that allow to go further as regards the sanctions and particularly the responsibilities that we may understand within the situation that definitely uh, enclose who are the responsible of these situations. If they violate as regarding international humanitarian law, it can be constituted as war crimes and crimes of civils against civilians. Definitely, the networks don't have a situation that we can define. Let's say collateral damages, and we have seen it in proportionality, and where the damage has been disproportionate and collateral harm are substantial. These migrations will also have substantial uh, inherence on the which on the part of the state could lead to international repairs and internal sanctions, particularly when one presents a due justification. A situation that we definitely need to keep in mind is Geneva, with really the applicable law of the jurisprudence and the legal issues, such as the inter-American law and inherent regulations on cyber operations that allow us to regulate these. There's some conclusions that I'm going to keep in mind without forgetting to say we have the need to have awareness and particularly in the military, so where the prohibition and limitations that recurrence as regards defining responsibilities in every sense. And we have to answer the question of image and of the presentation. Who is responsible? We are all responsible. We got responsible at the political level, user level, and community level. Why do we have at the user level? Because it's responsible of preparing a basic information. The networks are produced through information. This deliberate information that we provide, this makes us vulnerable towards in different situations. Why the mass media or the journalists and the radio are responsible because they have to have this clear and through dissemination of information, the expression cannot be given openly. In our case, if we see that the social networks, definitely the truth or lie, and they're without truth. And so these are spaces that we have to work with the possibility of seeing these situations that give us a freedom during the day-to-day life, have their due regulations within the executive authorities and powers. They should be the ministries that are involved in communication and have a strict regulation regarding the dissemination to the media and have a situation apart from the that are subject to the situations. There's something else that's responsible, a shared responsibility, technological, and IT is a huge step of humanity. We are seeing that everything is changing, is taking us along another road, which is quantical, and is going to different processes are going to evolve fastly. However, we need to have due regulations that orient us to see the efforts both of international law, such as Budapest or the one of the Kalim Manual, and different situations have a sense of the legal defined. I'm going to end up with the applicability of IHL cyberspace is applied within cyber operations. It will have place within the context of an armed conflict. Let's keep in mind that the domain of war can be influential in air, land, or maritime, and the electromagnetic space and the human space includes having inherence in the management of everything. It's not there. Biological damage, the incidents that could occur with this dimension regarding the development of cyber operation includes all of the military field operations and non-military field operations. The principles of standards and responsibilities has to be seen regarding the proportionality if there's a military necessity that involves the restriction of a essential public service. Let's keep in mind that all of the services around the world are found through the networks where programming are exactly defined. So the collapse of a city, of a state, of a country is given through one person that should even have the seen to work cyberspace within the attack definition of cyberspace. It constitutes an attack according to IHL, where it can cause damage or destruction to persons or protected assets. We have to keep in mind that to preserve and the future is the responsibility of all human beings. These deliberate attacks can also generate mass destruction, not only because it was constitution of being able to have that freedom. Not all of these cyber operations are attacks. Let's keep in mind that these attacks that can be translated are seen in the responsibility that we have, the resources that we have regarding the peripherals, such as memories, different systems, emails, and situations, and even through the family, we could introduce or have security. There's a situation we have to see with the protection of civilians and civilian assets. Further, can you summarize in 30 seconds the last part so that we can go to the question and answer? Thank you. Time is short and the topic is broad, but as a general conclusion, I could allow that cyberspace that has a new issue to work and challenges the issues of international humanitarian law and the fundamental the principles of international community. You see the challenge to develop the legal framework to guarantee that human rights are respected for this cycle. I thank you very much, and I conclude. Thank you very much.
Los tres ponentes estén muy atentos porque tengo
Please
6 preguntas
pay attention because I have 6 questions from the public and I'm going to read them.
las 6 preguntas.
I'm going to read the 6 questions.
A las preguntas a que ustedes consideran
Please
corresponden a su expertise.
just address the questions that correspond to your expertise, and then I'm going to give you 5 minutes to each of you to respond to these questions. So I'm going to read the 6 questions now. The first one is,
Los sistemas de armas autónomas.
the autonomous weapons, is it possible that there's better results
Sistemas implementados por
than the systems implemented by men?
la segunda pregunta de México.
Then the second question from Mexico. Within the types of artificial intelligence, how can they affect or influence or have an impact on the systems of security and defense? From Peru, with regards to the norms of artificial intelligence, do you consider that it should be taken into account in the military area? From Ecuador, since a machine doesn't have a legal person, it's not a legal person, who would be responsible in case of crimes against humanity? What legal mechanisms allow to overpose the activity of artificial intelligence above the rights, such as intimacy? And finally, from Chile, how can the clause, the Martens Clause, can influence in public policies with regards to artificial intelligence in the area of a defense area of a country? So first, we have 18 minutes, so everybody has like 5 minutes to respond. So I'm going to provide the first spaces for Dr. Lopez. Yes. I'm going to respond to the question. And I'm going to address briefly the ones made virtually. So the first question, this is an purely ethical topic. Let's imagine that we develop a system of autonomous weapons that have the capability
menos bajas,
to throw less bullets,
menos daños colaterales
less collateral damage than what weapons or systems of weapons controlled by humans can produce. Let's remember that the human being
a su vez el más compasivo.
is a compassionate being,
Y si nosotros fuéramos capaces de
and if we were able to design a system that in a war context, open war context, could produce less pain, less collateral damage, the question would be, why not rely on 100% autonomous weapon if the human rights are going to be even more respected than if these activities, war activities, were just controlled by human beings? All of these ethical questions are very deep, because what happens is that if we get to the general artificial intelligence phase, and there's like neuro autonomous systems, if they were able to get empirical results that were much better in terms of human methods that are controlled by humans, then the response would be, well, maybe the human being is not being a human being anymore, and it's giving everything to artificial intelligence. So I think that human beings have to be able to improve ethically and not be seduced by this true if a system can guarantee this level of reliability, then maybe it's preferable to leave it in the hands of the human beings. The ethical topic is basic. One of the topics is autonomous vehicles is also like delayed. If, for example, there's an autonomous driven car and somebody's crossing the street with two little brothers in the hand, and the autonomous car has to make the decision if they run over the kids because it's going really fast. Since we cannot answer this question yet, because human life is at stake, and human life is human life, from a kid or from an old person. So while we don't have an ethical response, a solid ethical response for the application of artificial intelligence in the civil as well as in the military fields, then it will not take place. It will not be implemented. If we arrive at a general artificial intelligence, it will have like hegemonic control over the history of humanity.
Bom, eu gostaria apenas de ressaltar
I would like to just highlight
que o direito internacional humanitário,
that
melhor,
humanitarian international law, which is known as international human rights of the armed forces, has been built to allow death, physical damage, and destruction. This paradigm, we cannot forget about it. Nuclear weapons cause death, damages, and destruction. Chemical weapons Any type of weapon that is being employed in an armed conflict causes death, damage, and destruction. So I think that's terrible. I always asked my students, I always tell them about Mayer, which is a human biologist, that human beings are biological, while it's a species that from its arising, we have to somehow face it like a reality. And this is what we're trying to do with the regulating of the autonomous weapons to avoid collateral damage for civilians and for people that are not participating in these activities, and also for civilian objects. Somebody asked if autonomous weapons improve results in armed conflicts. Without a doubt, they improve results in all aspects, in the damages that may be caused, in the troops that are being used, and if there's adherence to the principles that we have presented, then also the collateral damage issue is going to be solved. So let's remember that collateral damage is not prohibited during war. It is always related to military advantage that the troop will receive. This type of questionings, we have to always have these in mind. The speed of artificial intelligence is way faster than human reasoning. The artificial intelligence, it will be exchanging, it's basically exchanging the human reasoning by machine reasoning, and it may bring a military advantage. The machine is not going to be responsible. It's not going to be held responsible. But whoever uses the machine, then it will be subjected to humanitarian law. Definitely, the 6 points have been guided towards artificial intelligence. However, there's an interaction in the cyberspace where this tool has an impact every time. And as far as optimization of processes, mostly, and now that the processes are being standardized, there's a possibility of infiltration, of fraud in real time, not just as far as military actions, but also there's a possibility of management of networks, servers. Definitely were the situations where we could have redundancy. It would be definitely of definitive importance, and we have to have clear that this cybersecurity and artificial intelligence has systems for detecting intruders, which makes it more effective to detect also movement on databases. And another AI quality that it improves the predictive situations as far as analysis. A predictive analysis is more feasible. It allows to interact. It's also for decision making, not just for authorities, but it also has a particularly in the biometric capacity, and we need to be careful as far as the recurrence of the handling of all of these systems. And also AI can create intruders disguised as malware. So we're definitely in a situation of vulnerability to all of the possibilities that these criminal activities can have. And within the actions that have to be regulated within AI, as far as responsibilities for human rights, we have to see that the algorithms that have a repercussion have to be regulated. They need to have everything as far as limitations in order to generate spaces of confidence, of trust, and there's no like freedom in the use of these resources. This also generation of automated contents needs to be regulated, because definitely everything is education, and education should not be disinformation. It has to be clear information, precise and truthful. And social networks where we have this influence, it could be driving political messages or commercial messages, and definitely it can manipulate information, which is not something that complicates people just because it has the right to. So within the field that I had to present, this is the importance of AI in this space and in all fields of human activity. Thank you. Thank you, Colonel. We have 5 more minutes with the virtual public. So we're going to ask here the presenters that in 60 seconds, please share a final point that you want to transmit to the public. Colonel Medina. Yes, my final conclusions are as far as the commitment that we have as a state, as far as regulating the norms, as far as the cyberspace, spaces that allow to have a trust in development of conserving the humanity in a human rights situation, and the implications that we have in generating a state of the law, rule of law, through any technological advancement. Thank you, Colonel Medina. Now, Dr. Perez.
Bom, a minha consideração final é que
Oh, well, my final consideration is that I bring to you this perplexity, the development of the AI for weapon systems cannot be biased by international politics. There needs to be respect to the organs that control precisely for the Red Cross Committee. Otherwise, war in the future could be the last war of humanity. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Now, Dr. Lopez. Because of the lack of international treaties and legal norms that deal with the use of artificial intelligence in the military environment, the only tools that humanity has in order to regulate this topic are what we have defined as the law on artificial intelligence, and on the other side, the Martens Clause, which is an international humanitarian law, basically. And therefore, the systems of both autonomous weapons that need to be designed in order to comply with these components. So their whole life cycle need to be adhering to the norms of international humanitarian law, especially with Martens Clause. And the creators need to see how they can program these systems in accordance with these requirements. Okay, thank you for staying within the time frame. Now we're going to thank our virtual attendees, and now we're going to open up the physical space for the participants of class 65 and the rest of the public that is present, so that they can ask their questions for Dr. Perez, Colonel Lopez, and Colonel Medina. Sorry for the inconveniences. Next, we want to invite the moderator, Brigadier General retired Juan Carlos Gomez Ramirez, who is an expert in security, defense, and humanitarian affairs. He's a serious professional with more than 40 years in security, defense, and the responsible use of the force with a basis in human rights and humanitarian international law. He has been personnel for the Red Cross in Gaza from October to November of 2024, and currently he is a teacher in the IADC in Washington, and he is committed with ethical leadership and the strategic vision for the Americas. In this panel, he is joined by Colonel Eduardo Villancur Cavalcanti, a specialist in humanitarian law, military law, and public administration law. He is a lawyer in the lawyer, University of Brazil. He's specialized in humanitarian law, international humanitarian law, and human rights, military rights, and public administration rights. He is also an associated teacher for the courses of Portuguese in Sanremo, Italy, where he was designated by the commander of the army for 2019-2020 to establish a cooperation in person between the Brazilian army for the upper education as far as armed conflict rights. Also, Dr. Ana Lucia Cinta Narvaez is joining them. She is an advisor of the Armed Forces and Security, and also for the regional delegation for Mexico and Central America. She has a master's in human rights in the center, the European University Center. And also she worked in Mexico in the Supreme Court of Justice, in the Congress of La Unión, and then also after 3 years of military work, volunteer work in the ex-Republic of Yugoslavia. She has also done specialized studies by the Inter-American Institute of Human Rights in San Jose, Costa Rica, and the International Institute of Humanitarian Rights in San Remo, Italy. Also operational rights and humanitarian international law by the same institute, and on the International Committee of the Red Cross on the workshop for superior officers. And she entered the Committee of the Red Cross in 2017 as a program officer to the Armed Forces and Security Forces. Also, we have Colonel Luis Alfonso Novoa Diaz, who is a commissioner of human rights for the National Police of Colombia. He's an alternate representative for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in defense of the Colombian state to the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. He also was a consultant for the International Transitional Justice Center in the case of the clarification of the Holocaust of the Palace of Justice. Also, he's a consultant in security and justice from the Department of the United States in the Embassy of Guatemala. He also was an advisor in the peace process among FARC and the government, and also coordinator of the team of defenders of human rights between 2011 and 2021, and in the Office of High Commission of the United Nations for Human Rights in Colombia, and has a master in international penal law and defense and hemisphere security. I invite General Juan Carlos Gomez and the two presenters who are joining him. Before we start with the second panel, dear audience, we inform you that these opinions that are issued today and expressed by all the presenters represent their opinions, and they don't necessarily express the opinion of the IADB. Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is really an honor and a privilege to have the possibility of moderating this panel. I appreciate those who are joining us virtually. So there's more than 20,000 people connected through YouTube, and somehow this explains, but doesn't justify, but it explains the difficulties that we've had from the technical point of view. So for this second panel, we're going to talk about protection of civil population in context of security and in the context of defense. For me, it is a true honor and a privilege to begin this panel, which addresses one of the more complex dilemmas and urgent of our time, which is the protection of the civil population. And this is done in scenarios where public security and national defense are intertwined, and often in a very diffuse and defying manner. Today, we are going to have a serious conversation, a critical and very necessary one, because when urban violence gets intensified, when hybrid conflicts are diffusing the borders between war and public order, when the most vulnerable women, kids, entire communities are trapped in the middle of these dynamics. The legal framework that should be protecting them is put to the test. I want to set some examples of situations that have happened recently without judging, but just to mention them as an opening for our panelists and for you as participants of this event. So Sudan, 460 people died in a hospital. Rio de Janeiro, 132 deaths. Gaza, they're in the process of peace. Between 100 and 110 people died between the war of Russia and Ukraine. Between 500 and 1,000 people died yesterday in the Caribbean and in the Pacific in military operations in the last days. 62 people have died. This, without judging, it's just to highlight the importance of a topic like this today. This panel is not just an academic presentation. It is an invitation to think with rigor, to listen openly, and to debate with responsibility. We have 3 experts, international experts with operational, judicial, and humanitarian experience that without a doubt will help us explore the key questions that arise. And like, for example, when does the humanitarian international law apply in a context? How are human rights integrated into the military and police doctrine? What do we do in the gray areas, hybrid wars, and the use of force in social protests? There's no easy answers, but there is an obligation, an ethical and professional one, a legal responsibility to look for clarity, to look for coherence, to look for efficacy in the protection of civilians. That's the task that is gathering us here today. I invite you to listen with attention, to question openly and respectfully, because this debate is not just technical, it is deeply humane. And to enrich these reflections, we have 3 panelists that are very high level. Colonel Eduardo Betancourt from the Institute of Humanitarian International Law of San Remo, who is the academic soul that is more prestigious in humanitarian international law, and the colonel is a professor of this organization. We have Ana Luisa, who comes representing the International Committee of the Red Cross, and it is the international organization that has in humanitarian international law, is in charge of that, and it has as a responsibility its application. And also we have from Colombia, the Colonel Novoa, who is a person who I've had the fortune and the opportunity to get to know him in my work life in Colombia, and I know that his work in the topic of human rights and protection. So we have a panel which is very important, and it's going to illuminate us on the topics that we have stated. So, Colonel Eduardo, the floor is yours.
Bom dia, buenos dias, good morning.
Good morning.
Eu gostaria de cumprimentar e agradecer aos anfitriões, autoridades aqui presentes.
I'm going to also compliment, I'm going to say hello to everybody who's joining us today.
Realmente é complexo, é difícil.
It is a very complex issue. It is difficult, and the idea is to build a participation from everyone, a reflection that is useful for applying it in our countries and universally. I'm going to share a presentation so that we can take advantage of the time, make good use of time. So this is the response to the challenges that are presented in our seminars. This is a question that I'm bringing to the table. How can the protection of the civil population happen in the context of public security and defense of human rights and humanitarian international law? What norm is applicable? General said that this was a very complex and difficult topic. So I'm going to share this difficulty with you so that you can have a response. And the class of 65 will provide conclusions. So I'm putting this topic, this complication, because this is a new study of conflicts and shapes and that the UN has for this scenario, the current scenario, and I'm sharing this with you. So what is the best protection that we can give? We have to know what we are facing. We have to get to know what we're facing in order to provide a response. These are some pictures so that you can see the difficulties. Then you can see if the civilians are in a context of violence, if there's a conflict in the population. You can see there that they are civilians, they are not wearing uniforms. It is a participation that is not direct, but it contributes to the effort, or maybe they're victims of a situation of conflict and they need to be protected. This picture means that there's several parts of our country, the Middle East, and even my country. Certainly, there's no exclusivity. It happens in my country. There's situations, similar situations happening also in other parts of the world. This picture shows this case of where public forces are acting in a scenario of violence to restore the order, to bring tranquility, to calm down the civil population that live in this area, but the presence of the public forces cause and this is uncomfortable and inconvenient for some civilians. So the question is, who is that civilian? Who are we facing in this place? Are they criminals, isolated criminals? Are they criminal organizations? Or I don't know if there's a more complex configuration, like a criminal group, armed group. So we're getting to a level of organization like a criminal organized group, because I put all these options because it is difficult to identify these people. So then based on when we know these people, we know what norm to apply. This norm can be used to protect. It has to be applied in an adequate scenario. I heard the presenters, and maybe we need a new paradigm that needs to be developed and needs to be presented. Also the laws need to be updated to what's happening. I brought here a list of what we need to observe in this list of for classifying. In that scenario of violence, we have a technology that I'm sharing with you, which is, for example, we have a criminal. This is the highest level of criminality in suffrage, which is insurgency, which so that we can guarantee that the criminal conduct will be pursued. So whoever interprets the criminals, they're going to deliver the product of the criminals without the participation of the state. This can happen in many different ways. Sometimes the authorities, they have the power. The government is not the state here in these areas. So in these areas, who commands the life of people there? Is there like an orientation that needs to be followed? And or do they need to go far to buy water, for example? These are the essentials that we need to use every day: internet, television. Maybe that parallel power could be there, determining that this is like a parallel power. It is an offense to sovereignty. It would be a configuration of a territory that doesn't have a link to the government. So then this offense to sovereignty, we have an idea that it is necessary to have a defense action in that context, which is particular to the military forces. So to go beyond the police capacity and this is where it is important to have the military forces for combat. Also the organization and intensity of the violence. We need to have the perpetrators. There needs to be a certain amount of intensity of the violence, and then also the legal consequences need to be as intense. And so then here we don't know if it's an organized criminal group. This organization goes from one and it goes to the other. So then what is the intensity? Based on what parameters can this violence is violence that is typical to an armed conflict? The number of people, number of deaths, number of weapons that the organization has. It depends on the weapons that they are using. Are these weapons that can be make a helicopter come down? So we have to see the type of weapons. Do they have the necessary ammunition, the degree of violence that we're dealing with? And then we have the paradoxes, operational paradoxes of public forces. This is a matter of that the police forces need to be attributed with a specific activity that is military, that is strictly military. So the police with the military forces and the armed forces, they need to act within the same threshold or limit that the police are working on. So in my country, in Rio de Janeiro, they do a police operations with more than 130 people have died. It doesn't matter if they are police or civilians, they're just people. Can we configure this and classify it as a police operation so that it has like a configuration of armed conflict? Or maybe it's the transition from one to the other. So the difficulty to overcome this transition and to have security in that transition, who is responsible to say that we are in a transition from one scenario to the other? Is it the police or is it an armed conflict? We need to manage the activities. So the public forces have the legitimacy to approve this as the public opinion, as an ethical consideration. So to have this acceptance within the legal parameters, but also take into account the public opinion who is going to approve this intervention from the state. And on the contrary, the opponent is going to try to promote the strengthening of their criminal activities. So it is a challenge that we have in the current scenario. It may be that this is configuring a new classification, a new paradigm. Because I'm gonna put it here graphically so you can understand. We have the humanitarian international law, and it is complemented by human rights. And we have this intersection lines, which is the hard nucleus of the human rights. So what is this? We have the scenario of armed conflicts. Then this paradigm of application of law, in that case, specifically the human right norms, there are some characteristics that are important and necessary for legal security. I place here, I highlighted the rules. The rules are different in a conflict, in an armed conflict. If we have public security, it will. How do we do this? How does this transition happen? The proportion that we were talking about, the proportion would be the offense through moderate means or the same offense. We're talking about proportion of the armed forces.
O que vai acontecer no terreno para o operador é que ele vai estar atuando para dar uma solução estatal a um problema de violência, onde ele não pode ser, na verdade, o problema para o Estado. O operador
It could become a problem to the state. It has to operate within the limits. When we're talking about human rights, about a lethal force, normally in defense, we use the lethal force. In the armed conflicts, we're going to attack the objective. So we need to know in each scenario, we need to know which scenario is not applicable. We need to know if the state response is according to the dimension of the problem. So to attack a very serious problem with a not so robust answer can just make the problem even more serious. For example, here there's a comparison of this principle of proportion for the armed forces and public security. This is a subject for debate when we have organs of public security acting in a very violent context where the means are not adequate. There's people that are using long weapons, and public security don't have this type of weapons. So then there's need to verify that they exist. So we have this idea that the civilian has a rifle. This is a weapon that is exclusive. The fact that they have a weapon like this in their hands in the legal framework of public security should be regulated. So there's more questions than answers, than solutions. So I want you to know that this new trend of armed conflicts, we need to make the law legitimate. There's a situation that is a scenario that is appearing. We have here some pictures from the war of Iraq. These are scenarios of armed conflict and a picture of an operation of the guarantee of the law in Rio de Janeiro. In these images, I found these coincidences. The scenarios are similar. It means in a police operation,
cenários são parecidos.
It is really, for example, an infantry operation. The scenarios are similar, the military techniques are similar, but the legal framework is completely different.
E trazer também assim, o que acontece no treinador de transição, que chamamos de zona cinzenta, que foi dito pelos.
So what happens in this transition area, which are like the gray, which is a gray area,
Em termos de quantidade,
then we need to have a predominance. So when public force is used in the armed when do we use armed forces in public forces? So what is the question? Who is the civilian that needs to be protected? What is the legal framework applicable? The civilian is being protected by security, or are they on the contrary side? They're defending the criminal activity. So if we are in a police operation, this principle of humanitarian rights as principles
have the
from this
main
conclusion,
principle,
what is the
which is a
configuration of the situation?
configuration to have a framework both for the decision maker at the political level and as well as for the operator. The conclusions to brings more concerns and questions. We see the outlook of the credible situation. It's a transition of a public operation on the side of the investigation of violence and intensity of violence. We see the paradoxes of placing police forces as though they were the armed forces, and all the armed forces and so they use sometimes the public forces to bring adequate classification which is necessary for security to make a motivation of positioning who is the authority that needs to be brought into this conflict. In the case series one having the command of the empty spaces, authorities, the state authority, and authorities de facto, many times is somebody who's being oppressed by someone. And so we make a comparison in other scenarios. For example, the territoriality, and we place the armed forces in an area that is probably necessary for a local inhabitant. We ask if their permanence guarantees their security, they may say yes, but it's a question of bringing legitimacy of armed forces and delegitimize the state. And this goes the vacuum of sovereignty is where we see that in view of the armed forces. This is not adequate to have a rescue operation assigned only for political issue. We place an example is Rio de Janeiro, the police forces that are highly trained with a high combat power and authority. And we give this scenario as an example. The actor acts besides the role of public security. With this, I close the demonstration of legitimacy of the use of force, which is indispensable and is done precisely to this new parametrization and classification of the scenarios that could bring efficient responses, and security is critical at the political level and also for the operators at the tactical level. So we hope that this will evolve in our countries with whom we owe ourselves to serve among ourselves. The military, our commitment is to defend our country even with the sacrifice of our own life, if that would be necessary in order to save lives.
depois ser justamente juizado, ser o
and
processo de
the
condenação,
forces of the paradigm of being inadequate.
o
And
paradigma
so,
adequado do
so
julgamento.
the
Se é
paradigm,
complexo, se é
if
complexo,
not having
o
the
Estado também é
adequate
legitimado para
paradigm,
poder
but the use of forces is
emitir alguma ordem
confusing,
na série de
is
coisas para julgar
complex.
essa.
So I would like to share this. Thank you very much for allowing me to share. Thank you very much for giving us so much information. Thank you very much for your effort. And I would like to say something that is important, that more than the responsibilities that you could have at the security level and defense level is fundamental to be clear with the legal framework under which it's acting. And the commanders have play a very determining role because it's not only the risk of the civil population with whom we are obliged to protect, but also all of the members that make up our forces. Thank you so much. And please, Ana Luisa, the floor is yours.
Muchas gracias. Buenos días a todos. Aquellos que nos
Thank you
siguen en
very
línea,
much.
las más de 20,000
And
personas, a los
I
asistentes
know there's more than 1,000
presentes
persons
de clase
online, and there
65.
is many representatives of Class 65.
Juan Carlos lo acaba de
And
mencionar
precisely
para
what
pauta
Carlos
para el
just
comienzo de la
mentioned to give
presentación. Y
the
aprovecho para llamar
the
la atención
way to make
también
my
que
presentation, I
es el
take advantage to
momento
call your
de prestar
attention to
atención mucha
it's the
más
moment to
ahora,
pay greater
porque
attention, much
efectivamente,
more
aunque
so now, because
es un panel que habla de la
although this is a
protección
panel
de
that
las
talks
personas
about
civiles,
protection of the
también tiene
civilian
un impacto
and
fundamental,
also a
tanto en la
fundamental
realidad como en los
impact both in
desafíos
reality as
y en
or
las
well as in the
operaciones militares
challenges
actuales.
and for the
Pero no
current
olvidar en este
operations.
momento
But
de
at this
cuáles son,
point in
si
time,
es que existen,
if
los
what are, if
desafíos
they
para la
exist, the
aplicación del derecho
challenges for
internacional
the
humanitario en
enforcement
aquello que se
of
ha
the
denominado
international
las
humanitarian
zonas grises
law,
y las
where they
guerras
have
híbridas. Y
located
pues como el mismo
gray zones
concepto
and
nos indica,
hybrid wars. And
las
so
guerras
this concept
híbridas se refieren
indicates
a
that hybrid
situaciones
wars
que
means
surgen en
situations
diversa
that
naturaleza.
arise
Yo estoy
from
convencida de que si
natural
ahora
issues.
mismo
I'm convinced that if
abriera
currently
los micrófonos y
I would
preguntáramos una
open the
guerra híbrida,
microphones
tendría
about
tantos ejemplos
if this hybrid war, or
como
what is a hybrid war, I would have
denominaciones
more examples
diversas de cada uno de
and
los
diverse
participantes.
denominations from each one of
La
the
guerra
participants.
híbrida
Hybrid war
es un
is
concepto técnico,
a
un
technical
concepto
concept,
técnico
a
actualmente no hay
theoretical
todavía
concept.
un
Currently,
consenso sobre
there
una
is currently no
definición legal
consensus
y que es una respuesta
about what is
para
really the hybrid
enfrentar
war, and there is a
o
response
encontrar
to
lienzo a las
try to
realidades que
see the
confrontan
realities and what exists
la
currently
seguridad
and generate
internacional.
challenges for
¿Qué se
international
refiere con
security.
situación híbrida?
What does
Se
that
refiere a
hybrid
los medios
situation
y
refers to? It
mecanismos
refers to the
para la
means and
cooperación internacional.
mechanisms for
Estamos hablando de
operations.
la
We are
cooperación
talking about the continuations on the mortars where they use traditional weapons and also the appearance of other means of attack we have already talked about, and it has also been mentioned here about the surge of artificial intelligence. And we're talking about Semitic and non-Semitic uh, areas, and we're talking about actors that can only not only the armed forces, not only the civil population, but many times different governments use these concepts to also talk about. And there's also the situation that we're talking about something hybrid, about the effect. The effects can be fatal, it can be material, the civilian infrastructure as a possible emotional, psychological harm and damage, and the threats, erroneous information, disinformation, and could have effects not only in operations and civilian operations, but also in humanitarian assistance, a modality where these wars are carried out on. It could be open operations, could be undercover operations, and also the hybrid modality affects different areas, as I was mentioning, the civilian infrastructure, but also technological infrastructure that supply energy, potable water, not only to military infrastructure objectives, but particularly to civilian infrastructure. So, what are these hybrid wars that generate is a gray areas, these gray areas where the difficulty sometimes is to distinguish if we are before an armed conflict or other type of situations that has already been talked about by the ICRC and that are not able to only see in an armed conflict the situation, and as Juan Carlos was mentioning when I introduced my words, the important thing is to identify the legal applicable framework. So you will see on your screen some images that are as an illustration purpose without effect to pointing out uh, a specific country. There are. Do these gray zones exist where you do not know what's going on and what is the applicable law? Because many times they can respond to an environment that is not like a geopolitical plateau, but it also influences on social issues, cultural issues, and also technological. Now, when we prepared this topic, I was thinking what all the notions are determined these civil wars. They participate many times, governments or political groups or mass media. So, what are the rules that apply to the execution of military operation? I was thinking that many of the persons online were listening on and the persons who were present, I saw there was film Eyes in the Sky, and it represents very graphically that many times it's not the law that's involved in these types of operations. There's two very clear images of that film. Anybody who hasn't seen it, you should, because it can give way to great analysis where one of the advisors that is present in that film and is defining if they're going to carry out or not an attack following the precautionary principles and proportionality principles makes a pronouncement and says, I prefer that a non-armed group at this time classified by Hollywood as be responsible of the death of thousands of persons and know that the government of a country, at least in that film, be responsible of having authorized a girl to go. How many times the political issues are absolutely presentable and important? And the second is what I was saying, the viral part of where with all the political, economic, cultural, and of nationality and race policies, the one that is playing the role of the Minister of Defense tells his advisor never tell a soldier that he does not know the costs of a war because it happens with these. Uh, this is why these hybrid wars occur. Why is it important? Why is this topic so relevant? Because this presents humanitarian issues, ethical, as I heard in a presentation, and going to be the humans, a government that uh, becomes responsible what's occurring. And it also has a legal challenges. It is talked about, and this is one of the questions that arose during the first panel, if there is adequate regulation or not to, is to respond to technology and artificial intelligence and autonomous weapons, which are out there at this point in time, and also the humanitarian concerns and the displacement, affectation to fundamental rights such as life or the integrity of life. There's also challenges and security, and that uh, it's the responsibility of the armed forces and the security forces. These can have affectations to the civilians and combatants, but also to the authorities, if even if it's not an armed conflict. This has a real conflict because there's a lack of clarity of the scenarios, lack of identification in the applicable legal framework. It could have direct repercussions. The ICRC talks a lot about the trust in the legitimacy and the professional life and private life of all of those persons in charge of lending security or giving security and seeing for the security of the countries. And besides all those concepts, they present diffuse and a- old of realities. And I'm already seeing the timer, but all of this you have to contextualize it in the operational realities that exist today, both in the human rights area. And I think that mm, most of you who are listening are living under and is the different the support from military forces in legal security issues and talk about the participation of military and security operations and that talk about the dynamics of the context of multiplicity of actors talking in terms of Latin American of gang cartels and it's all the realities that are challenging not only the legal framework but also the capacities of the police forces and the multiple humanitarian consequences. We have countries in Latin America with a great number of disappeared persons, and these could be a higher number that exists in armed conflicts. That many of these confrontations are being registered in areas generating different impacts and consequences. This is to talk about the area of designations. But if I go to the armed conflicts, currently they have greater affectations on civil population than in combatant as it occurred in the First and Second World War. Humanitarian concerns, as I mentioned, there's already intercontinental networks and supply chains that directly affect the civil population. That means that the advance or the progress of technology is not only important for the law, but also for the reality as such. And because of the confidentiality with which these are managed, many times it's very difficult to give a scope or to give the adequate legal framework and specific framework. So, which is the applicable law and these types of operations? What are the authorities of the armed forces and security forces? What are their limitations? What is that thin line where the legitimacy can be placed in place? This is a very traditional structure and this is very clear. The conventions of Geneva, and when it's an armed conflict, be it international or national, and the rules of human rules and regulation of human rights when it's different types of violent situations. We do have to identify what are the applicable regulations, both in combat and in public security, because it presents many challenges for operations as I was mentioning at the beginning, challenges from the moment of the planning up to the conduction of operations, challenges in the delimitation of the program, the analysis of the mission, and the evaluation of factors, and the assessment of courses of action, and in decision making, challenges also in the coordination and communications, civil military communication, the use of decision, and the use of certain tactics and means, and that represent our armed forces in having equipment all for public security when the genuine nature of the armed forces is to participate in armed conflict situations where it is and should be the first resources in the conduction of operations, as I mentioned. And what position does the ICRC have before a situation like this? The ICRC, as has been recognized, and the nations that have were all signatories of the Convention of Geneva to be the guardian of international humanitarian law, and ICRC sustains and continues to sustain that all these issues there is applicable a law that has a solid and decisive framework about the reality on the terrain. And this is, my predecessor was saying, it's very clear when it's a confrontation or hostile activities or attacks against states. We're talking about wars and the first recognized forms of recognized by international humanitarian law. What legal framework applies and the additional protocols. But when we're talking about an internal conflict, a non-state with a state or among states, and the of, of IAD, we have to make an analysis on the terrain. It's a very detailed analysis, which is the intensity of the violence and the level of organization. In uh, previous slides, there's a series of factors that need to be analyzed. The, the type of caliber of the weapons and the type of the confrontations and the scope of the and different delimitation of the problem, and the same results in the organization. There is a capacity of transmission, there is training centers on the part of these armed groups, and it's not easy. One of the qualifications of this nature is not easy because one has to assess the behavior of each one of the groups involved. And you will agree with me that we have here, and I insist on your hearing online, representatives from many different countries. Who is the one that provides the weapons and who carries out the investigations? So where are they training? For example, in Mexico, they talk about the cartels topics, how many are being made up of, and what is the function that each one of these cells carrying out. And so currently there is no single authority responsible to make the classification of those conflicts. The ICRC makes it as a guardian of international humanitarian law and also has the responsibility to remind the states the compliance of the legal applicable legal framework is when it seems or not applicable. All of these situations or these realities, or as I mentioned a few minutes ago, the rights and operations go on different roads, or that the reality is going a step further than the law. What I consider is that the law is clear. Effectively, there are many spectrums that we need to continue seeing, but it's more the current reality that is elucidating that frailty of the legal framework. And I'm going to refer to what the professor said. It's not only to talk and develop a topic that has been provided, but to give ideas for reflection. It is important, both in human rights and also in the international humanitarian law, to visualize the good practices and successes that the compliance of the law has had. The reality sometimes surpasses as if on top of these current violations that we see as we're so flagrant to international humanitarian law and human rights and the contemporaneous conflicts and violent situations that surpass many times what one has imagined and imagined, not only for the police forces and armed forces that have been working on, and the now with the time that I have, ICRC has launched a world initiative to work on the international humanitarian law. I shall leave you in this presentation, but this world initiative is to invite all of the states to assume as a political commitment the debates over the applicability and observance of international humanitarian law. These terminologies are the gray zone, and they shouldn't surpass and not be placed over the legal certainty and reality, which is necessary to continue being, but it gives a certainty, a legal certainty, both for the application of the armed forces and security forces and also the civilian population that they are obliged to uh, to respond to. The comments are very important. We hope that there will be many questions with regards to this topic. As Ana Luisa states, the problem here is not legal. It is absolutely clear, transparent, and it's specific, it's pragmatic. But there are realities, operational realities, and political realities. And thinking on you as commanders, as leaders, is how that principle of equality is practiced in the best possible manner so that this exercise of the use of force is so necessary and minimizes the effects on the persons who have no participation in these situations. To close this panel, we shall give the floor to Colonel Novoa, who's going to talk about a current topic and a very concerning topic because there is a social protest. It's a constitutional right. In most of the countries, the people have the right to protest, but unfortunately, and with more frequency, we are seeing how this right is being turned into a chaos and is used to go further than what the law mentions. Colonel Novoa, I hope you're listening in, and the microphone is yours for 20 minutes. Good morning, General, and good morning for the panel members and the auditory. And I am going to make a presentation on my screen.
¿La podemos presentar acá nosotros? Si quiere mi coronel, nosotros desde acá la...
Colonel,
Si continúa con la publicación, sigan con el proyecto. Por favor, comparta pantalla.
please share your screen. Otherwise, we have your presentation here. We can place it. Tell me if you have any difficulty. Otherwise, we can share your screen for you.
Bueno, por favor, si vamos pasándola ya porque no permitió abrir aquí.
It didn't allow me to open it here.
Ok, ya la tenemos acá.
We have it here.
Ya puede comenzar, mi coronel. Está puesta
You
la
can start,
primera-
Colonel. The first
Muy buenos
slide
días.
is on.
Reitero el saludo
Okay,
para
good
los
morning.
integrantes de
So,
la clase de
hello
65.
again to all the members
Sí,
of class of 65.
que la mejor fue la 47, sí soy
The best one was the 47 class
americano de defensa. Bueno, yo quiero
from the
hacer
IADB.
una
I want to
reflexión y
make
obviamente
this
también invitar a
reflection
ustedes para
and
que reflexionemos sobre
to
las
invite you to
situaciones
reflect
fácticas
on these factic
jurídicas que
situations and
obviamente
legal
han acontecido
situations that
tanto en
have
nuestro hemisferio
occurred in our
como también
hemisphere
en otras
as
latitudes
well as in other
y en
latitudes
muchos países que
and in
obviamente
several
tienen
countries
dificultades
that have had
frente a
difficulties
un tema
facing
tan crucial y
a topic
de
that is
actualidad
so
como es el tema de la
crucial,
protesta
such
social.
as social
Creo que en la intervención
protests
anterior nos
topic,
dieron los
such as
elementos para
this
facilitar
topic.
esta conversación
And so the
con
other
todos
presentations
ustedes,
gave us the basis to
porque
start
hablar
this
de los
conversation with you,
conflictos
because when
híbridos
talking
tenemos
about
que hablar de las
hybrid conflicts, we
realidades de
have to
nuestros
talk about
países y
the
particularmente
realities of
Colombia
our countries, and in
está
particular
viendo
Colombia.
conflictos
There
híbridos
are
en relación a
hybrid
la confrontación entre
conflicts
la fuerza
whenever
pública
there's
del Estado
confrontations between the public force of the state
organizaciones
against also
delincuenciales, pero
criminal
también
organizations, but
con
also
grupos
with
denominados
groups
supuestamente
called
subversivos a los cuales se le aplica
subversive
igualmente el
groups,
derecho internacional humanitario.
which
La siguiente, por favor.
humanitarian international law is applicable to
Bueno, frente
them.
a los retos
So
y
facing these challenges
desafíos que tenemos,
that we
creo
have,
que es importante,
it is
siguiente, por favor,
important,
tener
next
en
slide,
cuenta
to
algo
keep into account something
que expresó en su momento Kofi Annan y que
that
tiene
was
que ver con
expressed by Kofi Annan, and that it has
temas
to
de
do with
seguridad y desarrollo.
topics
Kofi Annan
of
expresó algo en su
security and
momento que es tan
development. Kofi
válido
Annan
hoy en día,
expressed
y es
something that
que
is
no
so
hay seguridad sin
valid these
desarrollo,
days, is
no hay
that
desarrollo sin
there's no
seguridad,
security
y
without
no puede
development,
haber
and there's no
ninguna
development
de
without
las dos
security,
si no
and
se
the two of
respetan los
them
derechos humanos.
cannot
Esto
happen
es
if human rights are not
siempre
being
reitero
respected.
que
I think
tiene
that
que
this is something very,
tiene que ver con lo que está ocurriendo actualmente en
so it has to do with what is
países.
happening currently in our
Traigo a
countries.
colación esta frase de Kofi Annan porque
So I
tiene
bring this
que ver con
phrase
las
up because
reflexiones
I think it has to
que
do
quiero
with
hacerle
the
a continuación.
reflections
Siguiente, por
and
favor.
statements I want to do next.
Bueno, yo hago aquí alusión a
Here,
los hechos del
I am
2011,
referring to
particularmente en el
what happened in
Medio Oriente,
2011 in the Middle East,
donde pues hubo
when
levantamientos
there
contra
there was an
regímenes
uprising
autoritarios,
against
regímenes que limitaron
authoritarian
el ejercicio de
regimes
los derechos humanos,
that
pero también
were
un levantamiento
putting
exigiendo
obstacles to the human rights, and also
sus respectivos gobiernos
the
facilitaran
respective
acceso a
governments
derechos y servicios.
were
De hecho, la
putting an
primavera
obstacle
árabe
for access
tiene
to services
como tres
and also
situaciones
to
muy
human rights.
características. Una,
The
la
Arab
petición de
Spring
una
has
transición
three very specific
democrática, lo que subyace
things,
derechos políticos,
like
pero también reformas de tipo
there were
político-cultural y
reforms
reformas
such
de
as
carácter económico.
reforms,
Entonces, aquí
political
cae
reforms, and
uno
also economic
un instrumento
reforms.
internacional que
So
tiene que
then it
tener en
is an
cuenta
international
que se
instrument that
fueron
is good to keep into
económicos,
account
sociales y culturales
that there were
históricos.
implications
Obviamente tiene que
socially,
ser de estudio y de
culturally,
referencia para la
and it needs to
planificación
be a
tanto del servicio de
reference for
policía
planning
como
the police service as well
también
as
respecto a la seguridad nacional
national
y
security
a las actividades que desarrollan
and the
obviamente las
activities that are being
unidades de
developed
carácter militar.
by the military
La
units.
árabe ha puesto
The Arab Spring
problemas que deben
has
atender inicialmente las
problems
autoridades
that need to be
político-administrativas
solved by political and
para no entrar en
administrative
primera instancia
authorities
a una intervención
so that
militar.
there's no military
Creo que este es
intervention or police
un punto de
intervention.
referencia
I
importante.
think this is a point of
Derechos
reference that is
económicos,
very
sociales y
important.
culturales
These are
causa de
rights
un
that are
levantamiento
economic,
en
public,
una
and
parte
social,
del
which
mundo
are
como fue en el Medio
causing
Oriente.
these
Siguiente, por favor.
uprisings, such as in the Middle
Bueno, en
East.
Latinoamérica, pues
And in
no
Latin
fuimos ajenos
America,
a este efecto dominó
we had
de
this
la
domino
primavera árabe.
effect of the
El programa de
Arab
Naciones Unidas
Spring,
para el
the
Desarrollo,
UN
un
Program
informe
for Development.
hace un análisis del 2019 al 2023,
From
habla que
2019
en
to
América Latina y el
2023
Caribe
says
ha
that
habido
in
un
Latin
aumento de la
America and in
protesta
the
social
Caribbean, there
en
has
un
been an increase of social protests of
31.5%. Esto quiere decir que
31.5%.
se pasó de
This means that we went from
18.031 protestas a
18,000 protests to
perdón, a 24.371. Quiere decir que
24,371.
sigue en auge
So it
el
means
tema
that
de
it's
la
still an
protesta social y
increase,
esto
this topic of social
debe ser
protests,
motivo
and this needs to be
obviamente
a
de
reason
análisis
of
y de
analysis
referencia para
and
mirar
reference
cómo la
to look at
operación
how
operativa
the
tanto de las fuerzas
operational
militares como de la policía
doctrine of
es
military forces as
consecuente
well as
con
of the
los
police
derechos que la gente obviamente
agrees with the
está reclamando. Si
rights
se
that
habla
people
a
are
nivel
reclaiming.
Latinoamérica,
In Latin America, we're talking about the insatisfaction with the governments due to political restricted rights and economical crises, as well as inequality, as well as the topic of basic services, access to basic services.
Está en pantalla un informe.
On the screen, we have a
El
report,
objeto de mirar este informe es
and the reason why we're looking at this
hacer ver
report
la
is to
tendencia
make you see the trend,
de la fuerza, pero también
the
de las
employment
violencias
of
que
the
ejercen algunas
force and the
personas
vielences
que no
that some
acuden al derecho a
people
la protesta de acuerdo a como
who
está
are
establecido
that
en
are
la
not
normativa
doing this,
internacional y nacional en
practicing
algunos
the
países.
right of
Este
protest
informe
in
denominado
accordance with
letalidad
the
disfrazada
laws.
habla del
So
impacto
this is
en
called
las armas menos letales
lethality
que
in
actualmente se
disguise.
emplean en
So
los
it
cuerpos
is
de
talking
policía.
about the
Menciona
impact
que
of the
más de
use
100
of
infantes
non-lethal
heridos
weapons used by the
fueron
police.
causados por armas
And it says that
menos letales
more
por
than
cuerpos de policía desde el 2015. Y nos habla de
since
una cantidad de heridos
2015,
pues,
there were
altísima,
120,000 people wounded by
personas
police in
lesionadas por armas
protests.
gases, lesionadas
And
por
there's
balas de goma.
the
Y
number
aquí
of
hay
people
algunos en
that
particular, estos son
died
190 lesionados con
due
balas
to
de goma,
inhaling gases, and there's
65%
people also
eran
who
las
died
lesiones oculares,
with rubber
que es un
bullets.
hecho que se vuelve
And this is
reiterativo,
something
este
that
es un
is,
patrón
we can
que obviamente
see
esto
this
tiene
repeatedly.
una
It's a
analización clara
pattern, and
de
then this
traslado
needs to
de
be an object of
precisamente
analysis to
al
improve the
siguiente punto.
tactical doctrine.
Aquí tenemos el informe de
Here we
unos
have the
humanos sobre
report of the UN
ocurridos
on
en
human
Chile. Yo traigo
rights
esto
about
desde el punto de vista
Chile.
académico, con todo el respeto para los
This is
hermanos
from the
chilenos, pero creo que
academic point of
debemos mirar los
view,
informes
with all due
de
respect
entidades
from our
internacionales que
brothers
han publicado,
from
¿sí?
Chile,
Y
but we
aquí
need to see what has been published by
uno
international entities, and
reflexiona frente a algo
one
que ya
can
han dicho otros
reflect
panelistas, cómo el Estado
to
garantiza
what
los
other
derechos a la
panelists have
vida, ¿sí?
mentioned. How
El
does the
derecho a la
state
integridad
guarantee the right to
personal
life and
de quienes participan
personal integrity
obviamente en la
of the
protesta,
people
porque
who are
aquí se ve
participating in the
un número
protest?
que preocupa, 26
Because these
muertos,
are very
4.903
concerning numbers,
heridos, de ellos
26 people dead,
2.792 fueron miembros, lo que habla
4,903
de que
wounded,
quienes salen a protestar no todos lo hacen de manera
2,700 were
pacífica.
police
Y
officers.
aquí se
So,
vuelve a encontrar el tema de las lesiones
and this was
oculares,
supposed to be
tema muy
a peaceful
recurrente en algunos
protest.
cuerpos de
And
policía
this is very
en el
recurrent
continente,
in the
los temas de
police in the
tortura y la
continent,
violencia
this
sexual
topic
y de
of
género
torture and
es
also
una
gender
preocupación
violence and social violence, which
particularmente
is sexual violence,
aquí
which is
para el caso colombiano hemos venido
something
obviamente
very
constatación de
concerning
esto,
in
pero
Colombia.
también
We've been working on this, but it also mentions also arbitrary detention.
el ejercicio pacífico de la
So then
protesta o
how
ejercicio violento de la protesta con medidas que
so how
impidan
do
la
we
realización de libertad. En
use
Chile,
these
muchos
measures
consideran
of
la declaración de orden público
detainment
también
for
temas
public protests?
económicos, ¿sí?
And it sometimes
Del
it has to
transporte
do
público,
with
que es un
economic
4%
issues,
generó protestas
the
en
uprising
la
of the
sociedad. Y
prices of the
entonces
public
la pregunta
transportation
es,
generated
¿cuáles
protests in
son los
society.
lineamientos de carácter
So what are
político?
the
¿Cuáles son
political
los
guidelines?
espacios de
What are
diálogo
the
y
spaces for
garantías
dialogue so that we
de
don't get
protección?
to confrontation mechanisms? Next, please.
Bueno, el siguiente,
Then in the next slide,
estamos viendo el caso
we're looking at the case of
2019,
Ecuador in
los expertos de la
2019,
ONU
and the
también hicieron un
experts from the
análisis
UN
y volvemos
also
a
did an
mirar
analysis,
el
and
derecho a
we're
la vida, el derecho a
looking
la integridad personal,
here the right
tema
to
del
human
derecho a
life,
la
the right
libertad, derechos
to
contemplados en el artículo
freedom of
4,
rights
derecho a la
contemplated
vida
in
de
Article
la Convención
4,
Americana de
the
Derechos
right
Humanos,
to life
el
from the
5
Commission of
y
Human
detención
Rights,
arbitraria en el 7, que
and
son
arbitrary detention on number 7, which
a
are
los cuales
instruments
nuestros países,
that
particularmente el
our
hemisferio,
countries
pues
in the
obviamente
hemisphere
tenemos la
particularly
obligación de
are
cumplirlos. Allí también
obligated to comply with.
un problema relacionado con
There's
derechos
also a
económicos,
problem
sociales y
related with
culturales, tiene que ver con
economical and
la
cultural
inflación de
rights,
gasolina,
and it has to
obviamente
do
los
with the
combustibles y
increase
todo eso. Entonces hay
in
una
gas
tendencia frente a la situación
prices.
de la garantía y de
And
los
so
derechos
there's
económicos,
definitely a
sociales y
trend.
culturales como una obligación
It is like an
bajo un
obligation
principio de
under the
progresividad y es algo
principle
que nosotros
of
tendríamos que analizar
progressiveness, and it is something
unitariamente
that we need to
en este
analyze and
siguiente
look
programa.
at in our academies.
Este es el caso colombiano.
This is the
El caso
Colombian
colombiano
case.
también hubo afectación de los derechos que
Also,
mencioné
the
anteriormente.
rights that I already
También hubo un gran
mentioned
número
were
de
also
policías
affected,
heridos,
and
lo
there
que
were a
habla
lot of
que hay violencia,
police officers
pero
that were
también
wounded.
que ocurrieron hechos que se
And
salieron
this
de la
says
doctrina
this
y
this
hechos de carácter
implies that there
extraterritorial,
was violence and that there were
policías. Y aquí
obviously
nuevamente
situations
sale el tema
outside
de
of
las
the law.
lesiones oculares
And also there's
y es
eye injuries, which is recurrent, and also the detention under administrative measures.
Y allí Naciones Unidas llamó en medio
So
de
the
esta
UN
situación
called to facilitate the free access of food, resources, and medical missions. And this is going to be mentioned afterwards. Let's look at the challenges facing the legal framework. Here, we need to reflect to see what tools we can improve to facilitate that the social protests are really a pacific instrument, a peaceful instrument, and as the Commission on Human Rights mentions. The first that one has to say about this is that the public service should be at the service of people, and that this is developed, public power needs to be on the service of the people. And this is in Article 1 on the Human Rights Commission. And it talks about the respect and guaranteeing human rights of all people without any type of discrimination. So in this context that I have presented, if one has a question, then what has happened? Why haven't we guaranteed fully the exercise of this right to protest when it is contemplated within the framework of human rights in the American Commission of Human Rights? And so it talks about respect, the authorities, of what authorities cannot do, but also the obligations of that which they must do. And this document of the Commission talks about the guarantees as a principle, and it has to do with the development of norms, constitutional, administrative, or internal norms in the military institutions or police institutions to make these rights become effective. The right to protest is a right that has to do with individual expression or collective expression to express their inconformity, to condemn acts of corruption, or to condemn acts in which the governments have violated human rights. And this right is contemplated in the international norms, which is where I want to get to. And this right is recognized as a peaceful meeting without weapons. And there's 3 rights that are combined in social protests. It is the right of expression, the freedom of expression, and the freedom of association and freedom of meeting. And these 3 rights in the legal section of the American system is the right to protest. Next. The use of force. The use of force is determined for the case of this intervention based on what the Inter-American Court of Human Rights has delivered. And it talks about 3 main principles, which are the legality principle, the need principle, as basic principles so that the agents of the state can employ the elements or the weapons that the state is delivering, but who is using them, they have the guarantee that they are doing the power of the state in a legal and legitimate way, as was mentioned before. So there needs to be a legal framework that establishes the objective to express why the weapons are being used, and the need principle, which is connected to Article 3 for officers who are in charge of making the law, of complying with the law, and also the exceptional law of employing force if the peaceful means or dialogue means have been exhausted, then of course the force can be applicable using non-lethal methods, and the proportionality has to do with, as the Commission of Human Rights says, with the degree and the progress of the force that the state agent is applying to reduce the threat, taking into account somehow the cooperation that the person that is expressed by the person, which this would mean a more or less application of the force. Here, for example, we have the case of these brothers, and these three principles are being developed to be taken into account in the application of the doctrine of the military forces as well as the national police. Colonel, you only have 3 minutes so that you can have your conclusion. I was mentioning that I would like us to reflect on situations or factic things that can be improved. On Article 15 of the Commission, the American Commission of Human Rights, is very important for social protests because we are recognizing the right to meet in peace and without weapons. This is very specific. Next. Then one would say, well, the Molotov bombs and also stones or arrows, as some indigenous communities are using, these are weapons that are being used for social protests. This is the woman of a police officer who was set on fire, and the response was, well, what do we do about it? Next. We have another similar instrument, which is Article 21 of the International Pact of Civil and Political Rights. So then what is the reflection that I'm leaving you with these two instruments? In Article 15 of the Commission of Human Rights, we're talking about the right to meet peacefully without weapons. And the question is, we need to think about the power that the the Inter-American Court of Human Rights has. Particularly, the Commission in Article 62 talks about that the court can interpret instruments and the articles of the convention. And we need to see how the court is interpreting that article of meeting peacefully without weapons, documenting what has happened in the continent where there's obviously been aggression against the public forces. And in Article 21 of the Pact, it says, I think that it would be good to have an exchange with the committee of the Pact to look at this observation. And this is observation number 37. And then number 15, it says the right to meet peacefully. And it says there that you cannot apply violence, physical force against people to cause injuries or to damage goods, private goods. Next. Number 85 of observation 37 says that whenever there is a blockage of traffic for a long time, this affects the rights of other people, and this is sustained and long for a long time, even though there is the right to meet peacefully, you can definitely lift this blockage, eliminate this blockage, and we have some huge challenges. There's a big legal work that needs to be done between those who are in the hemisphere. Next, please. And number 90 talks about something very important that has to do with command and control. The state needs to investigate peacefully and timely any other reports on violations that happen during protests. And sometimes the communities need to have this in a timely and quick manner. And I want to mention here a very particular case, which is the case of George Floyd. In the case of George Floyd, which is a very well-known case, there was an excessive use of the force, which caused the death of him, and there were disorders. There was chaos in Minnesota and in New York. And the national judges compensated the family of George Floyd with 27 million, and 200 people who protested and who were overrun by the police, they received a compensation of $21,500. So then the judges, the United States judges, applied the control of conventionality. This means that the doctrine and legality goes to national courts in order to provide a response, to make justice and to guarantee the human rights of people. Thank you, Colonel. Please, we need a conclusion. Then, based on the question of applying human rights, we have the Colombian case, which is the case of Palmeras versus Colombia, where the humanitarian international law was applied. And this is a tool that we have used. I think that it's something that we need. There's a demand that obligates people to generate rights of protest. They need to be dialogue in order to avoid this. There's a norm framework that we need to examine. We need to examine the educational doctrine of our forces, also prevention, investigation, and also we need to repair and explore the tools that I've just mentioned, the opinion of the Inter-American Court in Article 15, the right to meet peacefully without weapons, and Article 21 of the Pact. In Observation 37, it also mentions there the right to meet peacefully. Thank you. Thank you, Colonel. Truly, this topic needs more time. I'm sorry that we didn't have that much time. We only have 10 more minutes, so we're going to take advantage of these 10 minutes with the questions that we have gotten from the people who are following this seminar virtually. So I'm going to Colonel Betancourt. Two for Ana Luisa and two for Colonel Novoa. And so please, just 3 minutes each, answer the questions and close with your ideas that you want to leave here in the auditorium. So for Colonel Betancourt from Ecuador, there's the question: in an armed conflict or international conflict, as the case of Ecuador, the hard nucleus was inclined to apply human international law. So how do we face this in a violence scenario? The second one says.
The second question says is what regulation should we apply in the asymmetric war if the enemy uses modern weapons such as drones? And the third is how to avoid. Oh, we only have those two. For Ana Luisa, what is the position of the International Committee of the Red Cross in the face of militarization, the use of public forces in rehabilitation centers taken by mafias in Latin American countries? And the second question that comes from Mexico, considering the graphic over the applicable law and practice, how do you see the limits between international humanitarian law, human rights, in the context of violence where there is no formal declaration of armed conflict, but yes, systematic violations of human rights. And for Colonel Novova, two questions from a from your point of view. What actions should the commander take in case of a protest that uses illegal weapons against the public forces? And the second is if you can uh, give us one or two successful examples as regards as means and methods used by some public force to minimize violence in social uh, chaotic or violent protests. So we shall start with Colonel.
Explica uma situação do Equador, que eu digo que nos serve
Thank you.
de caso emblemático,
Is
exemplos,
in the Ecuador case, Ecuador has a recognition on the part of the object, and it was a paradigm was given on the use of force for armed conflicts. In this case, the hard nucleus brings double security. It is enforced during the period of human rights, and when it has declaration of armed forces that is applicable within humanitarian laws, there is a right that has common regulations or standards that can be placed applicable and forced in case of armed conflicts. There is the objective and the use of lethal force to see of if there is a modification of the scenario, which is not a paradigm of armed forces. These rules are established in a way to compare this change. New formulated issues enter on the paradigms of use of lethal power and law and order. And when we use the use of drones in a violent situation, we saw a police operation, the opposing or criminals used the flying objects, and the public order cannot use helicopters, so there's a proportionality of the opponent to the state forces, and there's a convenience of using a more applicable weapon for both sides. When one uses, in one sense, the response is is not that good, so we have to have equality in that sense in using the same type of weaponing. That is my participation. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Sobre la primera
Ana
pregunta
Luisa,
del Comité
regarding the
Internacional
first
de Cruz
question, the
Roja
posture of the
sobre
International Committee for
la
Withdrawals,
participación de fuerzas de
regarding the
seguridad en centros de
participation
detención,
of
podemos
security
decir que
forces in detention centers, I
finalmente
can say that
esta
finally
respuesta por parte de los
this is a
estados y el Comité
response on the part
Internacional
of
de la
the
Cruz
states.
Roja
The ICRC
no tendría por qué
should
realizar un
not have
pronunciamiento
to
sobre la
realize a
condena por parte de
pronouncement
los invitados a
about
salvar de la
the
denominada
situation
militarización.
of
Lo
the
que sí se sí va a
denominated
hacer
militarization.
sí
What it
es
is going to
acompañar
do is
aquellas
always
fuerzas
accompany those forces,
legitimadas que utilicen la violencia
legitimated
ilícita para
forces
hacer
that
frente a
carry
esta
out
nueva realidad.
illicit
Vamos a
activities to make
acompañar
to
mediante
face
asesoría
these
técnica mediante la
legal
capacitación
lethal situations. So we're going to use these through training, and when it is possible to be there and present, the ICRC is supporting the forces that are carrying out these functions, whichever they are. And regarding the limits and suggestion of applicable law in a violent situation, it has prolonged and caused many humanitarian consequences and many challenges for public security. The answer could be not too popular, but I would say, and uh, to try to bring out all the values that distinguish the armed forces and the public forces, and go work on the respectfully on the legal mandate and the service that we know that many times it means sacrifice, means many efforts, and remind you that in your nation, in the battlefield, you recognize, understand, value, and think. Is many times is when it works when we like to apply armed conflict standards, and when we see in the law is the enforcement of human rights. Otherwise, it shall not continue to be easy because our armed forces are going on the transition to what I think many times this is like a short circuit because the armed forces are prepared for war and to save the sovereignty. And currently, there's many operations that are occurring that don't necessarily respond to that vocation. And a final thought to close my participation in this panel. And it's like the colleague said, we're all responsible. But I'm also aiming at my thoughts to commanders, where the training, experience, and capabilities many times is the same or higher than those of us who see that topic from the academia or the studies to sustain the enforce of if somebody can maintain the existence and the capacity and enforce though, because it's you who allow us to have hold the positions, because it's hybrid wars and is violence that is affecting the humanitarian assistance organizations, that you know you have to fulfill the mission, but not at any price, not a price of causing harm to the civilian population, uh, because of the price of taking care of the physical, your physical pres- participation. And this assistance of the ICRC, what it seeks is the contemporaneous issues is that the law continues to be enforced. Thank you very much, and Luisa, for your thoughts. And I give the floor to Colonel Novoa to also, uh, in 3 minutes, make reflections to answer the question.
Muchas gracias, mi general. Creo que es
Thank you
importante
very
hacernos la
much,
pregunta
General. I
qué
think the
acciones debería
question
tomar un comandante cuando está
that
en el marco de
what
una
action
protesta
should a
civil o
commander
violente
take when they're in
y
the
recibe
framework of a protest and they
fuerza
see
letal.
that they are
Yo
using lethal
mencionaba que
force? I mentioned
el
that
Estado es el responsable
the
del
state
respeto y la
is
garantía de
responsible
los
in the
derechos humanos de
respect,
las
the
personas,
guarantee of
como
the
decía
life of the
aquí
civil
cuando estamos
population,
refiriéndonos
as
a
Ana Luisa
oficiales que
said when we're
tienen capacidad
talking
de
to
conducción,
officers
obviamente
who have the
estratégica.
capacity
Cuando
to
yo hablaba de los
conduct
tres
them in a
principios para el
strategic
empleo de la
manner.
fuerza,
When
que
I
son
talked
desarrollo de
about
la
the principle
jurisprudencia,
and the use
recursos
of force,
interamericanales,
which is
creo
of
que
the
pues primero habrá un
Inter-American
marco jurídico
legal
que
court, first of all,
indique
a
qué es
legal
lo que
framework
puedo
that
hacer en el
indicates
marco de la
what I can do
Constitución, la
within the
ley
framework of the
y los
Constitution, the
convenios
law, and the
internacionales en materia de derechos
international
humanos y derecho
agreements,
internacional
and
humanitario.
as
Y
regards
eso tiene
the
que estar
human rights
bajado
and
a la doctrina,
international
obviamente,
humanitarian
para que
law.
actúe
These have to
táctica y
be in
operacionalmente.
the doctrine that they
Pero
operate
yo
uh,
aquí indicaría
tactically, and
que
I would
hay que tener presente
indicate
el
that we
principio
have to
de
keep
los
in
principios
mind
básicos
the
para el empleo de la fuerza
basic
armas, lo que
principles
indica
to
que
use of
cuando está en
firearms.
peligro
That
la vida de
indicates
un
when the life
ciudadano
of an official
o de una
is
persona o de un tercero al cual
a
estemos
threat, or a
protegiendo,
third person that we're protecting.
obviamente
Obviously,
el empleo de la fuerza
the
letal
use of lethal
en
force
para atender la protesta social debe
is
ser
to attend
preventivo,
when attend the
un enemigo
uh,
exterior
social
y
protests. They
una
have to
fuerza debe
have
ser precisamente con
preventive
armas menos
methods,
letales para,
this less
obviamente, su
lethal
activación en el
weapons
momento en que
to
esto
be
ocurra y tiene que
activated
ser
in the case it
responsabilidad
occurs,
del
and it should be the
comandante
responsibility of, or it
de esa
has to be the
operativa, de esa intervención.
responsibility of the
Pero aquí
commander of the
importante
operational
contemplar ese principio 9 barra
unit.
9
But it's
que es la
important to
regla de oro para
impose
evitar, obviamente,
Principle 9, which is the rule
extrarse
of God
y yo
to
menciono
use
esto
little
porque acá
force.
hay una
I mentioned
responsabilidad
this because there's a
tanto de mis tres
responsibility
policías cuando
both with the police and when we intervene in these types of situations because we decide over the life, the freedom and integrity of the persons. These are three rights, and these mean legal capacity and technical capacity, obviously to respond to the situations that are presented, but also to um, render accounts. And regarding the second question, the means and methods to minimize violent protests, I would like to say that with our experience in 2021, the police established the Office of the Police, and we also carried out the creation of education of the National Police with the accompaniment of the Human Rights UN Office, and this brought us to establish protocols to see how we could establish dialogue with civil situation. Nowadays, in the intervention of a violent protest, a dialogue unit is totally prepared and comes with the support from the Human Rights Commissioner office, and also the office has seats in 52 units of the police throughout the country, and the uh, the actions with the civil population and talking to them, we have been able to dismount violence acts, and we seek for consultation groups to sit down and talk. And there's experiences that I can mention as part of the respect to human rights within the country of Colombia. Thank you very much, Colonel Novoa. And with this, we close the cycle of questions and answers with those of you who accompany us virtually, and I give the floor to our Master of Ceremonies to thank the speakers and the moderators for this excellent seminar, and also thank the more than 20,000 persons that followed us to different areas, the class of 65. And I also would like to mention the next seminar that will be carried out on November 28, 2025, by virtual mode, is a seminar of prevention and response to disaster, lessons learned and good practices on the international cooperation for humanitarian assistance. To continue, I would like to invite Mr. Reinaldo Salgado Piato, Director General of the Secretariat of the IADB, to give his words of appreciation.
Senhor Almirante Puntel, Ministro do Superior Tribunal Militar do Brasil, demais autoridades já nominadas, senhoras e senhores, estimados participantes,
Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed participants, panelists, students of Class 65, good afternoon. A special greeting to more than the 7,000 persons registered from the different countries. It is a great satisfaction to have held a seminar of international humanitarian law and human rights. We close the date of relevant information which have been so enriching. We've had the opportunity to listen to experts, well-known experts that addressed very important topics for the enforcement of the international humanitarian law and human rights in the current context of armed conflicts. The challenges brought by different countries have been broadly discussed on human rights, and the impact of technology such as artificial intelligence, cyber information, and drones. As Secretary of the Inter-American Defense Board, and on behalf of the leadership, and especially General Villeda, President and Vice President of the Board, and General of the Inter-American Defense Board, we sincerely appreciate the members of the speakers of the panel, and Minister, Higher Minister from Brazil, and the School of Education and Perfecting of Magistrates in Military Justice, and with whom we have a very broad cooperation agreement. Mr. Perez, Dr. Marcos Notes, professor of the University of Chile, and the strategic studies, the uh, artificial intelligence, Lieutenant Colonel Diaz from the Center of International Humanitarian Law and Human Rights, Colonel Eduardo Vitenco, professor of the International Institute of Humanitarian Law from San Remo, Italian, Dr. Ana Luisa, regional delegate for Mexico and Central America of the International Committee of Red Cross, Colonel Luis Rao of the National Police of Colombia. I also thank the organizers and collaborators that made this event possible, very especially to our moderators, Dr. Srine, Brigadier Juan Carlos, professor of the School of Technical, the Master of Ceremony, advisor, the Secretariat of the students of the class of 65, and all of everybody who has accompanied us live and later. This information will be given after this, and the agencies of international cooperation representatives from civil society they share the purpose of promoting dialogue and exchange of experiences over common challenges and cooperation between the member states and the observers of the IADB. We close sure that the information that was shared will help to bring respect to the international standards of international humanitarian law and human rights and of the public security of this country. The Inter-American Defense Force reaffirms its commitment to maintain constructive and continuous dialogue, and we look for to excellence and the comparison of the military to make a more safe and secure hemisphere. I close my words with thanking everybody. Many thanks and God bless until the next time.